Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Alan Carver heard the phone ring in the outer waiting room. He drummed his fingers on his old desk while listening to Helen. His assistant of 13 years answered the phone.
"Good evening, TM Labor,"
she said with a raspy voice into the antique rotary phone. Carver was hoping to get through the whole night crisis-free, but as he eavesdropped on the conversation, he was beginning to realize that hope was about to be dashed. Within a minute, Helen's cigarette-scarred voice piped in on Carver's intercom.
"Alan, irate customer on line 1. Think positive. In a year or two, we could have 10 lines."
She replied with her "we are going to be huge" sarcasm. That stopped being funny about 10 years ago.
"So shoot me. I love the classics."
How irate, on a scale of 1 to 10. Carver hoped for a number between 4 and 5.
"About a 15.
Oh, lovely. What's he complaining about?
I tell you in his words, but my parents didn't raise me to use that kind of language."
Okay, Carver sighed. Give me about 30 seconds. After a brief consideration, he added, "Then bring me a scotch."
"Your wish is my command, master."
Helen signed off with a static pop. Alan Carver, TM Labor's district manager for West Coast operations for over 15 years, rolled up his sleeves and got comfortable in his leather chair. Before he was ready, line 1 rang. Reaching out for the receiver, he glanced at the clock. It was a few ticks before midnight. He answered the phone in his best customer service voice. "Hello, this is Alan Carver, third shift manager." "Mr. Carver, what the hell kind of service are you running?" "I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir," Carver replied. "Your laborers should have started work hours ago." Carver tried to take control of the conversation. "Let's back up a bit. Tell me who you are and what property you represent." "Oh, great. I have to tell the story over again. Didn't that idiot who answered the phone tell you any of it?" "We're not going to accomplish anything with insults, sir. Please just tell me who you are and give me your account number if you have it." There was a pause while Carver imagined the man composing himself. "My name is David McFarland. I don't have my account number on me. I own the McFarland Winery in Napa Valley." "How long have you been a client at TM, Mr. McFarland?" "This is my 3rd week." Helen walked in with a scotch in one hand. Taking the receiver off his ear, Carver spoke in a more urgent tone to his assistant. "I need a customer file on a McFarland Winery in Napa Valley."
"I was about to go on break."
"What do I pay you for?" Carver snapped. Helen put her hands on her hips.
"The worst coffee you ever tasted. Frighteningly good looks. And mind-bending conversation."
Carver gave Helen an impatient glare.
All right, she shrugged. "I'll look for the file."
She handed him the glass and moved to a file cabinet that looked as if it was a relic from the 1800s. "Mr. Carver, are you there?" The voice boomed on the other side of line 1. Yes, I'm here. I was just looking for your file. Now, what can I help you with? Is the service not what we promised?" No. The services so far has been excellent," Mr. McFarland replied in a grudging tone. "Then what seems to be the problem?" "There's no one in my vineyard. I can see the field your organization is supposed to work tonight from my bedroom window. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd look out on the laborers you are supposed to have in my field, starting at 10 p.m. And it's almost midnight. So where are they?" Oh, okay, Carver said. "This is a common misunderstanding with our service. All laborers do 8 hours of work in less than 4 hours. We meet the negotiated shift quota in half the time. So, our workers don't show up until midnight, and they will be gone by 4 a.m. He took a quick sip of scotch. "They've been meeting their quotas for grapes picked, I'm assuming, Mr. McFarland?" "Yes, they have." Even exceeded it a few times, but why not just have them work the full 8 hours of third shift? I could really use the boost in production. Oh, we can't do that, Mr. McFarland. We need the buffer of at least 2 hours between the end of your second shift and the beginning of your first shift, so that our laborers on third don't run into any of your people. Your sales rep must have explained this to you. Oh, don't give me that. I don't care if you're using illegals to work my field. Do I sound like I'm from immigration? I just want to know, when are they going to start work? As I said, they work your field from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. and they'll be gone by the time your first shift shows up. I've been in this business for 20 years, McFarland said. And there's just no way 30 pickers could do the amount of work your laborers have been doing in just 4 hours. And why don't they use any of the field lights? My foreman says your people haven't used the light setup for the second and third shifts. Our laborers have extremely good night vision, and they work faster in the dark. Carver wondered if he was saying too much. Helen handed him the customer file. He flipped through it and pulled out a copy of the contract. And what kind of illegal aliens do the work of 2 men in the dark? Carver cleared his throat. Mr. McFarland, it says here in the contract that you hired us to supply no less than 30 laborers to work your field on third shift. We are doing that, I believe. It further states that you'll keep your people away from the designated field for the entire third shift. It also says that you'll not ask the kind of questions you're asking. How the hell do I know what the contract says? It's not even in English. Yes, I know. It's a form of ancient Hebrew. The owner of TM insists on it. Some sort of tradition. Carver sighed. I'll make sure you receive an English translation, but I have no doubt that your sales rep went over all these points. Yeah, he did. It made as much sense then as it does now. Look, if I don't get some straight answers, I'm going to have to cancel our contract. Oh, I don't think you'll do that, Mr. McFarland. It says here that our service is creating a substantial savings for you. McFarland was silent for a moment. Yes, it is. I'd just like some peace of mind, Carver. I want to know who's working my field and when they'll arrive. We're going to stay on this phone until you tell me. Carver sipped his scotch and took a deep breath. What the hell? McFarland didn't seem to be a bad sort. A little insistent, but nothing Carver couldn't handle. Telling him the truth shouldn't matter. It was just business. As long as McFarland was still cutting his costs by using TM, he'd remain a client. They all did. Mr. McFarland, I'll try to shed some light on this for you. What do you know about graveyards? What? To be specific, the history of human internment in cemeteries. Not a lot, but what does? Bear with me. Thousands of years before cemeteries, when people died, they were taken to a place where their bodies, and more importantly, their life essences, could be reclaimed by nature. Animals did the job, mostly. What was left, the elements took care of. Well, this is fascinating stuff, but when the first cemeteries started popping up in human societies, let's say 3000 BC, they didn't cause a problem. The bodies and life essence could still be reclaimed by nature to the ground. The circle of life was not interrupted until we started using coffins. You understand about the circle of life? Yes, McFarland said. I did see The Lion King. Well, good. Carver cleared his throat again. Anyways, the human life force was being trapped inside the coffins, and nature wasn't able to recycle it. So nature, as nature always does, solved the problem. And how did it do that? Over the next few centuries, a new species evolved. One that lived underground, and whose sole purpose was to free the decomposing bodies from their prisons. Nature created the gopher to solve that problem. Carver rolled his eyes heavenward. No, Mr. McFarland, nature created something else. Something very few humans ever get to see. Something you don't want to see. They have many names, but only one English word describes them. Have you ever heard of ghouls, Mr. McFarland? Oh, for crying out loud, I've just about had it with this crap. Who's your supervisor? Ghouls are real, Mr. McFarland. They're a relatively young species evolved for a specific purpose, but they are very real. So, what are you saying? Are you saying you have ghouls working in my fields? Since cremation became more popular, there's been a slow decline of the cemetery business. Many ghouls have been displaced and need to find new ways to live. TM Labor has been proudly employing displaced ghouls for nearly half a century. Jesus, that story has so much bullshit I could use it as fertilizer. So, what do these ghouls look like? Carver shuddered. Ghoul relations really isn't my department, but from the pictures I've seen, well, you trust me, you don't want to know. McFarland snorted. So, when are your imaginary ghouls going to arrive? It's 2 minutes past midnight, and I haven't heard or seen a single truck. Well, there won't be any trucks. They move underground, and they're very prompt. I'm sure they're in your field right now doing their job as promised. Well, I don't see anybody. I don't know how far you live from the field, but I'm sure the vantage point from your bedroom isn't good enough to see anything, especially in the dark. What vantage point? I'm here in the field, where your laborers are supposed to be, and I'm all alone. Carver almost froze. Oh, Jesus. Oh, tell me you're joking. After I saw no activity out here, I got dressed, grabbed my cell phone, and went to investigate. Carver looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 minutes past midnight. Christ, McFarland, get out of there! What's the big deal? McFarland sounded amused. So I get to glimpse your spooky workforce. Look, McFarland, Carver was beginning to panic. I'll cancel your contract. I'll refund your money. Anything you want. Just please, get out of the field! All right, I'm walking out. What's all the urgency? It's part of the deal we made with them, Carver replied, getting his breathing under control. What's part of the deal? That they can have anything they find. Snakes, squirrels, insects, whatever. Have? McFarland asked. I mean kill and eat, Carver said. If you're trying to scare me, it's not working. I don't care if you're scared. For God's sakes, get out of the field! I'm going. I'm about 100 yards from the edge. But, I have to tell you, Mr. Carver, I am not happy with the way you've spoken to me, and I'm definite... McFarland broke off. McFarland? Silence. McFarland! Carver stood up as Helen came back into his office. She gazed at Carver, and he could see his panic reflected in her eyes. McFarland, are you there? With a definite tremble in his voice, McFarland finally spoke. Carver, for the love of God, have they seen you? Carver already knew the answer. Oh God, get me out of here, Carver. Carver's mouth went dry. I can't. There's nothing. They're all around me. McFarland's voice was just a whimper. Their eyes. Oh God, what's wrong with their eyes? Carver worked his mouth to wet his tongue. Godspeed, Mr. McFarland, he said, as he held the phone away from his ear. Helen moved forward and depressed the speaker button. Instantly, the office was alive with the sounds of struggle, a voice that tried to scream, but became a choked gagging. Then, with a horrific suddenness, a sharp, grotesque crack echoed in Carver's office, sounding like a tree limb being ripped from its place on the trunk. A faded, gurgling noise bled through the line as Carver returned the receiver and disengaged the speaker. He sunk into the chair and ran his fingers through his hair. After a moment of ceremonial silence, Carver said, We're going to need a cleanup crew in Napa. I'm on it, Helen replied. And I'll get some client termination forms. Thanks, Helen. Carver held up his empty glass. And another drink, please. Helen glanced back on her way out. I'll bring you the bottle. Then, she closed Carver's door.
I always loved the flea market in my city. It wasn't so much that I needed anything, it was just nice to go there with friends. We'd have a look around at all the things available, have some beers, and enjoy the weather. The best time to go was during summer. The place was always packed with people and merchants selling all sorts of things. You could find vintage LPs, old classical books, and a lot of strange memorabilia. It was a treasure trove. I was always on the lookout for weird things with a certain character. Whenever I went there, I bought strange figurines, weird books, old postcards and photographs, and other similar things. The last time I was there was about a month ago. This visit changed my life forever. While my friend Martin, an avid collector, had a look at a stall that sold DVDs and CDs, I checked out the other stalls nearby. It wasn't long before I noticed an old woman who propped up a little camping table. On it, she placed about 24 keys. How weird's that? Someone selling keys. I walked up to have a look almost instantly. Most of the keys were for display and were old and rusty, yet some were strangely ornate, made of gold or other more expensive materials. While I studied them, my friend walked up to me. His eyes went to the table in front of me and he laughed. "Who the hell's going to buy a random key?" he asked. "Oh, they're not random. They're special keys for special places," the woman behind the table answered. "Yeah, sure, whatever," he replied, shrugged, and wandered off. "Where are they from? Like those over here? They look really old," I asked, pointing at one of the more rusty ones. The woman leaned forward and explained, "Well, those you just pointed at are from old buildings, houses that are long gone. Those over there," she pointed at the more ornate ones, "are from old castles and forts. They were used to open certain hidden doors." My interest was piqued instantly. I don't know why, but owning a key that used to open a secret door at a castle sounded awesome. For a while, I looked at all the old ornate keys before I picked up one that seemed to be made of bronze. It was richly decorated, sprouting various little twirls. "How much for this one?" "Dude, why the hell are you buying a stupid old key? What do you want with it?" I sighed. Martin was back to annoy me. "I don't know. It looks cool," I said, shrugging. The woman had lifted the key and was gazing at it. "Now, young man, you've picked a very special one," she said after a while. I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. I was sure she was going to tell me a long, elaborate story about how it was the key to Ludwig XIV's personal sex dungeon in the depths of Versailles. To my surprise, she told me no such story. No, she simply nodded. "It's yours for €2, she finally said. "You'll take it for one." Martin, who loved to barter, cut in. The woman eyed him for a moment before she nodded. "Well, for one then." I handed her €1, and she handed me the key. "You see, man, that's how you barter. You always have to barter at the flea market." I sighed once more. Martin could go a bit overboard with buying things at the flea market. More than once he got into an argument over prices, or left when a merchant didn't want to take off another €1. While he rambled on, I looked at the key once more. It sure looked special, with all the little twirls and embellishments. We were at the flea market for another hour, and had 2 more beers before we made our way home. It was barely 2 in the afternoon, but because of the heat, I felt quite drunk. The moment I made it back to my apartment, I took a nap. I slept almost all afternoon, but I thankfully didn't feel drunk anymore when I got back up in the early evening. The first thing I did was go through my backpack and sort through my newest treasures. I'd gotten a strange old picture book depicting the works of M.C. Escher and other similar artists, a framed postcard depicting some sort of surreal motif, and finally the ornate bronze key. I eyed it for a bit and couldn't help but laugh. You could find the weirdest things at the flea market. I put away the book, hung up the framed postcard, and eventually connected the key to a chain and let it dangle from a small nail in the wall. I considered going out to meet some friends, but I didn't feel like it after spending a good part of the day at the flea market. Instead, I found myself a movie on Netflix and prepared myself for a slow, chill evening. When I returned from the bathroom at one point, my eyes wandered back to the strange key I'd bought. That design. Why was it so strange? All those little twirls and embellishments. Had this thing ever fit anywhere? For a while I sat there, turning it over in my hands before I got an idea. I walked up to my small storage room, and to my surprise, the key was an almost perfect fit for the lock. Huh. What do you know? It fits, I said in surprise. Almost without thinking, I tried turning it and realized I could. The lock clicked, then clicked again before the door sprang open. I pushed the door open a bit more, and my eyes grew wide. I got a hold of the handle to close it again, but when I stared through the crack, I didn't see my storage room and the haphazardly stacked boxes. Instead, I was staring at an entirely different room. What I saw in front of me was a much bigger, much wider room than my small storage room or any other room in my apartment was. An icy shiver went down my spine, and I threw the door shut. When I opened it again, the world was normal again, and all I saw was a small storage room and boxes. It had been nothing but the trick of an eye, an optical illusion. I laughed. Of course it was. And yet I had held the strange, twisted key in my hands, and I couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. "You've picked a very special one," the old saleswoman had said. Almost in a trance, I put the key back in the lock with slightly shaking hands. Once more I turned, and the lock clicked once, twice, and the door opened again. I didn't throw it shut right away this time, but peeked inside carefully. What I saw was some sort of grand hall. I saw a rich hardwood table surrounded by hardwood chairs. As I looked inside, the walls were clad in fine wood and sprouted ornate paintings. A huge, expensive carpet covered the floor. I could see various golden figurines positioned on a small cupboard that stood against one wall from where I was. What the hell? This was supposed to be my storage room. How could there be a room like this here? Then I thought back to what the old woman had said. Those keys were used to open hidden rooms in old castles and forts. So, was this some sort of hidden room in an old castle? I couldn't help but laugh. This was silly. No, this was insane. And yet the room was right there, right in front of me. I could almost step inside if I wanted to. The moment this crossed my mind, a strange sense of curiosity came over me. Could I just enter? My eyes wandered back to the golden figurines on the cupboard. Could I just take them? For a few moments I was unsure and wondered if this was some sort of trick. Maybe, whatever this was, it was trying to lure me in. I carefully took off one of my slippers, picked it up and pushed it forward, past the threshold of the doorframe. I don't know what I expected to happen, but nothing did. With that, I dropped the slipper and put it back on before I reached out with my hand. Nothing happened. My hand continued touching nothing but air. There was no sensation or anything. The room was just here. Once more, my eyes wandered to the cupboard and the riches on top of it. Leaving the door open, I got a hold of a chair from the living room. Then I propped it against the door to keep it from falling shut. Excitement washed over me as I pushed my foot forward and brought it down on the rich carpet. Then I took another step. My heart was beating hard in my chest, and I could feel my blood rushing through my veins. My eyes darted left and right, almost expecting a door to open or something, to storm at me. When nothing happened, I hurried over to the cupboard and picked up on the first of the golden figurines, then another, and finally an ornate golden candle holder as well. A few seconds later, I was back in my apartment. My heart was still beating fast, and I was panting. I couldn't believe any of this. For a moment, I stared back before I threw the door in fear of repercussions. I turned the key twice more. I was happy to see my old, dusty storage room again. A sigh of relief escaped me, and I quickly put the strange, multi-dimensional key back on its little nail. For a moment I wondered if it all had been a dream, a silly flight of fancy conjured by reading too many fantasy novels. But when I turned from the door, I noticed the golden figurines and the golden candle holder. I picked them up almost by instinct and took them with me into the living room. For long minutes I studied them, tested their weight, before I couldn't help but grin. I had no clue what these things would be worth, but I knew they had to be worth something. At first I didn't know what to do with them. I couldn't very well put them on eBay, and I had no clue what any of them would be worth. No, I probably had to take them to some antique store. I busied myself on the internet for the next few evenings, reading up on historical figurines and their worth and searching for a reputable store. A few days later, I put the figurines and the candlebox holder in a box and went on my trip. The owner was impressed. He said this was centuries old, but not shoddy or cheaply made. When he asked me where I got it from, I told him an elaborate story about my grandfather having been a collector of old items. I came upon them by accident while cleaning his attic and thought they might be worth something. The man eyed me for a moment, and I could tell he wondered about the authenticity of my story. Soon enough, though, his greed pushed those doubts aside. He was quick to make me an offer, one that was pretty damn good, but I'd also done my research. The man held my gaze for a few moments before he pretended to give the figurines and the candle holder another look. Then he gave me another, higher offer. I told him I'd looked at other stores online, and similar items went for much higher prices. I was sure he was still ripping me off, but the four-figure numbers he gave me were too good to pass for someone like me. Before I could leave, however, the man smiled at me and told me if I found any other valuables amongst my grandfather's collection, I should visit him. He'd be more than happy to have a look at them. And so I sold. I told him I'd see what I could find. It's often said that money poisons people, and after my experiences those past weeks, I wholeheartedly agree. The moment I sold those figurines and that candle holder, the moment I tasted riches, that was the moment I knew I had opened that door again. The instant I was back in my apartment, the key was in my hands again. I turned once, then twice, and the moment the door sprang open, I pushed the little box I'd still been holding between the door and the door frame and ventured inside. My eyes darted left and right, back and forth, in search of anything valuable. There were paintings, there was some silver tableware, and an ornate dagger I'd not noticed before. I got a hold of the dagger and as much of the silverware I could carry, and dumped them into my hallway in a swift motion. A few minutes later, I'd taken down all the paintings. I stared back, and for a moment, I considered taking even the rich hardwood chairs. Then I told myself enough was enough for today. I'd have to sell all those items first, anyway. During my search online, I soon found another reputable buyer. The silverware turned out to lend me a good price, and so did two of the paintings. The dagger, however, was the most valuable of all items I'd plundered so far, because it was jeweled with various stones of value. I couldn't help but grin on my entire drive back. This was crazy. I was freaking rich. However, the third time I ventured into the room, I found little of value anymore. There were a few smaller silver items I hadn't taken until now, and an ornate vase at the end of the hall, but that was about it. Once I'd closed the door again, I couldn't help but frown at my measly yield. Maybe I could take some chairs after all at a later point. It wasn't long before I wondered what else the key could do. After making a few, as I told myself, necessary purchases, I knew I could use a bit more. The more money you have, the easier it is to spend it. The first thing I tried was my kitchen door. The key fit perfectly, and I turned it once, then twice. When it sprang open, I expected to find the same room. Instead, I was greeted by what I assumed to be a small study. I couldn't help but grin at the various items I saw there. I saw golden candle holders, an ornate oil lamp, a globe, and various other richly decorated items. It didn't take me long to plunder the room for everything it was worth. After that, I tried the key at my bedroom door. However, this time it led me to a musky, dark room, most likely a cellar or something. I cursed in frustration and threw the door shut again. Even after 2 more tries, the door never led me to a different room. I realized that I'd just learned a valuable piece of information. This key could open the doors to rooms in a different place and time, but a single door could only ever open to a single room. Over the course of an evening, I tried all the doors in my small apartment. While some doors led me to other dark or empty rooms, I discovered that my bathroom door led to a dressing room stacked with rich jewelry. And yet, even though my living room table was covered in rich antique items, I wanted more. One night, at 3 a.m, I descended and tried every single door I could find. It wasn't long before I resorted to using different doors. The first ones I opened were the doors in my apartment building's basement. While some of these doors led me to more valuables, I also discovered different rooms. Rooms similar to that old musty cellar my bedroom door led to. While some were nothing but old sheds or musty basements, others were stranger, creepy even. One door opened up to nothing but oppressive darkness. It wafted outside in heavy, thick swaths. I froze when I saw the outlines of something stirring in the back. For the blink of an eye before I threw the door shut again, my eyes met something else, something staring at me from the back of the room. It should have been at this moment I'd call it quits and give up, but of course I didn't. After all, only a single door could ever open to a single room, right? A few days later, all signs of danger were forgotten, and any repercussions for my actions were gone. No, I told myself. If I ever noticed something strange again, I could throw the door shut, and that was it. Before long, I increased the scale of my operations. It wasn't so much in sales, but in terms of doors. I couldn't just go around and use random doors. Eventually, someone would notice what I was doing, and there was no telling what would happen. At first, I went on Airbnb and rented out random apartments in my city, using their doors to check for rooms that contained riches. Slowly but steadily, my stock of values increased, and I had boxes upon boxes of valuables in my small apartment before long. I was still careful in selling them. I never went to the same store twice, never sold more than a few select items, and always came prepared with a story. But even as I made more and more money, even as I filled up box upon box of valuables, my greed increased tenfold. I wouldn't stop or give up. No, I had plans, dreams, and ideas that I'd already mapped out in my mind. Eventually, I found what I'd been looking for. Here in eastern Germany, there are many old abandoned industrial areas, remnants of companies that went bankrupt after the unification and was left to rot. There were entire factory complexes and old office buildings like this in my city. Sure, they'd been stripped of most of their valuables, but those weren't of interest to me. No, as many as I could find, what I was looking for were doors. While many of the old doors had been broken down, I still found as many still functioning. That's how I came to spend many days and nights traversing old abandoned complexes, hunting for doors and the riches behind them. However, not every door led me to a room filled with treasures, and the more doors I tried and grittier I got, the more often I encountered other rooms. More than once, I found musty basements or old rotten attics. At one point, I even found myself in what was, without a doubt, a torture chamber. The smell of blood and other body fluids hung heavy in the air. I retched audibly when I opened the door, and as a result, I could hear rattling chains and a quiet, broken shriek that made me throw the door in an instant. At another time, I pushed open the door only to be greeted by a small, otherworldly study. A few bluish candles only lighted it, and the moment I peeked inside, I found myself face to face with a man sitting behind a desk. When he saw me, he smiled at me and bade me enter and join him. As I stared at him, there was something strange about him. He was wearing a pair of thick, heavy spectacles, but even in the low light of the room, it seemed that there were no eyes behind him. When he opened his mouth, I saw thick, heavy teeth that differed from any I'd ever seen. His voice, too, was almost too human, too studied. For a long second, he simply sat there, smiling at me. Then he pushed himself off of his chair, throwing his body forward in my direction. I screamed, and in shock and terror, I threw the door shut and locked it. I stumbled backward, shaken and scared. What the hell was that? That man or that thing? I told myself to let it all go. This was getting dangerous, and I'd gathered more than enough valuables, hadn't I? What if I encountered something worse than this man? And yet I couldn't. My mind was too filled with money, tainted by it, and only a few days later, I made my way to yet another complex. After I'd pocketed another few handfuls of what I assumed to be rich jewelry, I already had forgotten about the strange man thing I'd encountered. It was the next door, however, that changed everything. As so often happened, I found a door at the end of the hallway. I turned the key twice and waited for the door to unlock. Then, I carefully pushed it open. All I could see was oppressive darkness, a darkness so heavy it wafted outside in thick swaths. For a moment, the strangest sense of déjà vu washed over me. Hadn't I seen this before? Before I could do anything, a face pushed itself from the darkness ahead and came to a rest mere inches in front of me. It was a female face, but it was all wrong and strangely elongated. The moment I saw it, I cringed back. My, oh my, I've been wondering when you'd be back. It crooned out in a distorted, high-pitched voice. Every fiber in my body screamed at me to run, to get away, but I rushed forward to close the door, to pull it shut in front of me of whatever this thing was. I clung to the rotten door and was about to pull it shut when two giant, ghastly hands pushed themselves between the door and the door frame. The door was torn from my hands, and then torn from the door frame with a single swift motion. The face started giggling before it vanished again in darkness. And yet, I'd never seen a body. But as I stood there, when my eyes finally got used to the darkness, I realized why. That face, that head, it was connected to an elongated neck. Behind it, in the darkness, loomed a terrible thing, a giant, twisted abomination. I saw more faces, more mouths, more eyes, all connected to a single bloated body, sprouting hundreds of arms and legs. To the creature's side, I noticed another door, and then another. And as the giggling grew louder, I heard it from a multitude of mouths, and I realized my mistake. A single door can never open more than one specific door. But if a room has more than one door, Then, oh God, I had it all wrong. And this creature knew, and it had waited for me just to make this single mistake. When the giant creature rose, I stumbled backward when it pulled itself closer to the door. As I dashed away and rushed down the hallway in sheer and utter terror, I heard the door frame giving way, heard as the creature was pulling itself through it. I only turned back once, only once. I saw dozens of heads on elongated necks, saw a disgusting bloated body, and watched as a multitude of hands and feet dragged it from whatever twisted dimension this creature had been trapped in. Then I ran. I ran and fled from the industrial area as fast as I could. The industrial area was on the news the next day. A building had collapsed for unknown reasons, causing massive destruction. Thankfully, the area had been abandoned years ago and no one had been harmed. At first, I was relieved, thinking that the crumbling building must have crushed the creature. However, the first of the many missing people reports were on the news. All around this abandoned industrial area, people had disappeared and ghastly remains had been found. By now, more than a dozen people have gone missing, not only there but also in other areas of my city. I don't know what that creature is. I don't know how it can stay hidden. But I know a single thing. It's only because of my greed that it was unleashed upon the world.
Elmer took a drag on his Marlboro, paused a moment to consider the playing cards pinched between his thumb and forefinger, then blew the smoke from his nostrils in two thick plumes. He surveyed the two men before him, then let his gaze wander aimlessly over the parking lot of the Triple B. The Triple B truck stop was an oasis of light along the darkest stretch of Highway 19. The highway spans from the Florida Panhandle, across the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, before finally terminating a hair's breadth from the Mexico border in Texas. There were a lot of empty spaces between the cities and towns along the way, and the Triple B filled one of those gaps. Half gas station and half diner, it offered a refuge to the weary truckers who made their living hauling cargo from one end of the South to the other. After getting the trucks lined up and settled for the night, Elmer had suggested a sort of friendly game of poker. His young trainee Kyle had wrestled the little card table out of the truck, and there they sat, betting quarters and dimes beneath the tall parking lot lights. He'd coordinated the stop with his buddy Lewis, hoping that before the night was over, he'd have a pocketful of the old man's cash.
"God damn it, Elmer,"
Lewis said, his words puffing out the hairs of his thick gray and handlebar mustache.
"Would you quit being dramatic and decide what the hell you're going to do with those cards before I up and die over here?"
Elmer retrieved a cigarette from his lips and cocked an eyebrow towards Lewis.
"Why, Lewis, are you down and didn't even tell me?" "Every day,"
Lewis growled.
"But I'd like to finish this damn hand before the Reaper's blade tears me a new asshole."
"Language, Lewis," Elmer chided. "Little pitchers have big ears."
"I'm 23,
Kyle said, his voice flat.
"Why do you two insist on treating me like a child?"
Elmer chuckled. "Ain't no offense intended, kid. I'm just old enough to be your father, you know. Hitting the big 5-0 in a few years. Lewis here could be your grandfather."
"Fuck off, Elmer,"
Lewis grumbled.
"I ain't that much older than you."
"Point being," Elmer continued, "we were just trying to connect with the typical example of the American youth of today through sarcasm and well-meaning insults about your mother and what she may or may not do in the bedroom."
"And there ain't much she won't do in the bedroom,"
Lewis concluded. Lewis and Elmer's laughter echoed across the nearly empty parking lot.
All right,
Kyle said.
Say what you want about my mama, but it ain't gonna stop me from taking all your money tonight.
Lewis smiled, his mustache curling with the corners of his mouth.
Sounds to me like the apple don't fall too far from the whore tree.
Goddamn, I walked right into that one,
Kyle said. His eyes widened as he pointed a finger at Lewis, whose smile suggested he had another quip.
Don't do it, old man.
I wouldn't gonna,
Lewis said.
Low-hanging fruit. Now, if you had said you backed up into that one.
That drew more laughs until Elmer waved his hand. Okay, boys, enough chit-chat. Time to pay up. Elmer slapped his hand down on the flimsy table. Straight.
Shit,
Lewis said, tossing his cards face down on the table. Kyle grinned and Elmer's smile faltered.
Flush,
Kyle said, and slowly fanned his cards out to show a row of clubs. Elmer grimaced. That money would have been better spent on your mama. Lewis and Kyle laughed again, but Elmer only managed to smile. He'd never tell the kid, but he enjoyed hanging around with him. It made him feel younger, or nostalgic at the thought of being 23 again, maybe. What was he doing at Kyle's age? Probably high off his ass and bumming around from couch to couch in a Soundgarden t-shirt. No one heard the woman's footsteps over the laughter.
Hello?
She said. Their laughs tapered off. They all looked at her as she stumbled over to them. She looked to be about Kyle's age. Her dark hair had an orange shine to it from the sodium lights overhead, and it flowed down over her shoulders to the straps of her navy shirt, the logo for NASA printed across the front. It didn't fit quite right, too short and riding up enough to show the skin just above the top of her jeans. And it didn't take more than a glance to tell she wasn't wearing a bra, even if you weren't trying to look.
We ain't interested,
Lewis said, dismissively waving his hand.
Hop on over to another truck, lizard.
She said.
Please, I need help.
She fell forward, knocking the small table over and sending the cards flying and tumbling like dead leaves.
Jesus!
Kyle yelled, stepping over the mess and reaching out to her. He rolled her over and rested her head on one of his thighs.
Are you okay?
She mumbled something too low for Elmer to hear.
Tell her to speak up,
Lewis said. Elmer gave him an irritated sideways glance and knelt beside the woman. Hey, we're going to get you some help, okay? What's your name?
Lindsay,
she said, her voice a little clearer this time.
Lindsay Jackson. I'm not sure what's going on. We'll help you figure it out,
Kyle said.
You got family nearby? Are we still in the park?
The three men looked at one another confused.
What park?
Lewis asked.
Oak Mountain,
she said.
Never heard of it,
Lewis snorted.
You on drugs or something?
Give her a break, man, Elmer said. He dug his cell phone from his pocket, opened the browser, and searched for Oak Mountain. His eyes widened in the blue-white glow of the phone screen. Elmer cleared his throat. Kyle, you stay with her. Lewis, let me talk to you for a minute. Elmer led Lewis around the truck and stopped in front of the grill. Lewis, Oak Mountain State Park is in Alabama, and it's damn near 600 miles from here. Lewis raised one gray eyebrow. Pardon? Elmer turned the phone around to show him. That ain't all, Lou. I wish to Christ it was, though, because my head's about to bust open. Elmer scrolled further down the page and clicked on the link.
Search continues for girl missing in Oak Mountain State Park,
Lewis read aloud, squinting at the screen. Look at the date, Elmer said. She went missing in August. It's November now.
I know what damn month it is, boy,
Lewis said. Elmer pushed the phone closer to Lewis's face.
The picture, Lou. Look at the damn picture. All right. Jesus. You know I ain't got my reading glasses on. Just let me see it,
he said, taking the phone from Elmer's shaky fingers and holding it out at arm's length to see it clearly.
Picture of Lindsay Jackson taken on the day she went missing, he mumbled. So what? Oh, Jesus. He slowly gave the phone back to Elmer. What does it mean? I ain't got a fucking clue, Elmer said, looking at the picture again. It showed Lindsay, same dark hair, wearing the same NASA shirt and jeans, and a pink backpack hanging from her shoulders. But this girl in the picture can't be more than 12 years old, Lou. The woman over there looks about as old as Kyle. It ain't possible, Lewis said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know it, Elmer said, but it's still happening anyway. Lindsay Jackson, not even a teenager, went missing 600 miles from here. And now she shows up 3 months later, still wearing the same clothes, now too damn small for her, 'cause she's a goddamn decade older. Jesus Christ, Lewis said, and shook his head. I wish you hadn't just spelled it out like that. That just made it all worse. Well, let's get back to Kyle, Elmer said. They returned to the scattered mess of the card game. Lindsay was now sitting up, her head down, dark hair hanging over her face. You do it any better, miss, Elmer said. She looked up with haunted eyes.
I'm starting to remember things I don't understand.
Well, that's good, ain't it? Lewis said. That you're remembering, not that you can't understand it. He turned to Elmer and mumbled, I don't even know what the hell I'm saying here. Kyle awkwardly patted her shoulder.
Can you tell them what you told me?
She nodded and began.
I was with my family at the state park. We were having fun, fishing and swimming and everything. We had a campfire one night, and I had to, go. But I didn't want to walk all the way to the public restrooms. So my dad said, just walk a little way into the trees.
She grimaced.
But when I was done, I couldn't find my way back. Everything was dark and the trees were closed in, and I screamed for my dad, but no one answered. I walked in the direction that I'd come from. I don't know how long, and then I saw the lights. I knowed it. Goddamn aliens.
Elmer gave him a disapproving look, but said nothing. After all, he didn't have a better explanation.
What?
She said.
No, nothing like that. They were headlights.
In the woods? Elmer said. Did you come up on a road or something? She shook her head.
Not that I remember. I just saw them shining through the trees and I walked to them. It was...
Her face grew animated and her eyes wide.
It was like this. A truck like this.
She stabbed a finger at Elmer's Peterbilt. Wait, you found one of these in the woods? Elmer said.
Could be a logging truck,
Kyle said.
I ain't never been up that way, but maybe.
Lindsay,
Lewis said.
Did it have a flatbed with big logs on the back?
No,
she said.
It was a big box like this one.
Well, shit,
Lewis said. Let's get her inside, Elmer said. Then we can call the authorities and try to figure this out. Ray's probably got the grill closed and clean, but I'm sure we can find you something to eat if you're hungry. Lindsay nodded and let Kyle help her up, but she kept one arm firmly covering her chest. Elmer pulled off his flannel shirt and held it out by the shoulders. Here, take this. She stuck one arm in and then the other and shrugged the shirt on as they walked past the gas pumps and over to the main building. The bell over the door rang out as Lewis opened the door, holding it wide for everyone to pass through. The lights overhead illuminated the rows of candies and chips. One of the old drink coolers in the back stood open, half empty, with boxes of cans waiting to be stocked inside. Cold air washed over Elmer's bare arms. Damn, you'd think Ray's cheap ass would have the AC turned down in November.
Yeah,
Lewis said.
And he still got all the diner's lights on, too. Must have had a late night.
Something tickled at the back of Elmer's neck. Something dark. something wrong. Cal, he said as calmly as he could. Go behind the counter there and look beneath the register. Ray and Doreen always kept an old Mossberg pump action there. Grab it.
What?
Cal said, a look of worry creeping over his features. Just do as I said, kid. What are we doing here, Elmer? Lewis said in a low voice. You think there's trouble? I don't know, Elmer said. But how many years we been coming to the Triple B? You ever know Ray to leave every light in the diner on past 9? Or leave the air running after sundown? Cal spoke up from behind them.
I got it,
he said, and held the shotgun out to Elmer. Elmer shook his head. You hold on to it.
I don't even know how to use it.
Come on, son, Lewis spat. Your daddy ain't teach you nothing?
Cal's face hardened.
My daddy died in Iraq when I was a baby. I don't know how to use this, and I don't want to neither.
All right, Elmer said with a solemn nod. I'll take it. Let's check the diner first. The diner was separate from the rest of the store, with its own set of double doors that led into a small dining area with a counter behind which Ray spent most of his days scrambling eggs, flipping burgers, and deep-frying corn dogs.
I don't want to go in there,
Lindsay said. Shit, neither do we, but we got to, Elmer said. He pressed the slide release on the shotgun and drew the forestock back, nodding at the shell visible in the chamber. He pushed the forestock forward once more, the clack too loud in the quiet of the room. Okay, let's move. Elmer held the shotgun ready, barrel pointed at an angle to the floor, the stock resting in the hollow of his shoulder. He pressed the thin metal door open and stepped into the diner. Blood dotted the yellowed linoleum floor in haphazard sprays, all leading to a puddle forming beneath the counter.
Sweet Jesus,
Lewis said in a breathless whisper. From behind him came the sounds of Kyle retching and spitting. Ray was laid out on the top of the counter, one arm dangling off the edge, blood dripping slowly from his fingertips. Steak knives stuck out from his torso like a porcupine's quills. Well, hey there, gentlemen. The man was sitting in the back booth, wearing a cowboy hat, a blood-streaked white shirt, and a wide grin. He had an arm around Doreen, her eyes red and swollen, her nearly white hair disheveled. There was a dish towel tied around her head, gagging her, and her tied hand sat limply atop the table. She let out a muffled cry at the sight of Elmer and the rest. Come on in, the smiling man said. There's plenty of room, but if you're hungry, well, I wouldn't trust the food here, you know. Looks mighty unsanitary from where I'm sitting. Elmer raised the shotgun. I don't know who the fuck you think you are, mister, but you'd better let that woman go right now. The man tilted his head to the side and put on a comical look of feigned puzzlement. Now, surely you ain't gonna blast a bunch of buckshot this way, are you, friend? You run an awful lot of risk hitting good old Doreen here. And I think she's been through quite enough already. Ain't that right, Doreen? She said nothing, just silently wept.
Why?
Lewis said.
Why'd you kill Ray?
Oh, come now, the man said. Even with eyes as old as yours, you can see this was nothing but a terrible accident. Poor old Ray slipped and fell on a knife. Then he did it again, and then 20 or so more times. Why, if it wasn't so awful, then it would have been hilarious. He's no Laurel, or Hardy for that matter, but he definitely could have been the fourth stooge.
What the hell is he on about?
Kyle whispered. Elmer slowly took a few steps toward the man, careful not to slip in the blood. Hand over Doreen, and this can all be between you and the cops. We just want to make sure she's safe, that's all. That is mighty kind of you, the man said. He leaned back against his seat inside, and Elmer saw a scar on the man's neck right below his ear, shaped like the number 3. The man continued, "But I just can't give her over. I will, however, propose a trade. I give you sweet Doreen here, and you give me back my little lost sheep." "What are you talking about?" "Lindsay, of course," the man said. "Let her come back to me and all is forgiven, and we can move on our separate ways." The men all turned and looked to Lindsay.
"I just want to go home. Just want to go home. Just want to go home," she whispered, her eyes shut tight and her balled-up fists held to either side of her head. "You're the one who took her," Elmer said, stunned. "You kidnapped her." "I found her," the man said, pointing the knife he held toward Elmer. "But I guess if you want to be specific, the witch in the woods found her, and I came to pick her up and take her away." "To where?" "I just told you," the man said. "Away." "She ain't going anywhere else with you." "Look," the man said, "I'm what you'd call a middleman. I take lost little girls from one place and transport them to another, wherever the client wishes. And if I'm not back on the road with little Miss Lindsay here, then my boss, well, let's just say he won't be none too pleased." "That sounds like your problem," Elmer said. No, the man said. "If my boss gets involved, it's everyone's problem." Lewis stood next to Elmer. "He's connected, Elmer," Lewis said. "Illuminati, or the Deep State, or something else." "Knock it off with that shit," Elmer hissed. "There ain't no Deep State, no Q, and no reptile people. Get your head out of Fox News' ass. He's just a murdering asshole with a hostage." "But what about that damn time jump, Elmer? Huh? What about that?" "Yes," the middleman said with glee. "What about that, Elmer?" "Shut the fuck up before I paint that wall with whatever brains you got left," Elmer said. "Maybe I'm an alien," the middleman said. "Or maybe I'm a hidden operative all jumped up on adrenochrome. What do you think there, Lou?" Lewis lowered his head, looking ashamed. "Could be either," he said. "Jesus wept," Elmer said. "Enough of this shit. Let the woman go." The man sighed. "I really thought we could just make this easy. But I guess not." The middleman swung the knife up in a vicious arc and planted the blade in the soft skin right beneath Doreen's chin. She sat there, eyes wide and jaw bobbing up and down, looking like a fish left out of water. He pulled the knife away, and Doreen's blood sprayed over the old tabletop. "Oh, buddy," the middleman said with a laugh. "I ain't had this much fun in years." Elmer let his eyes leave the growing puddle of Doreen's blood. He aimed a shotgun at the man's chest and pulled the trigger. No deafening boom came, only an underwhelming click. "I'm afraid it ain't that easy." He lifted himself up and stood on top of the table. Elmer racked the shotgun, sending the shell turning through the air as another clicked into place. He pulled the trigger again and was again disappointed. The middleman shrugged his shoulders. "You can try the other shells if you like, but I'm gonna have to go ahead and tell you now, they ain't gonna work any better. When you've been around as long as I have, you get a feeling about these things." Elmer lowered the shotgun, and his mouth felt dry and sticky as he spoke. "Who are you?" he asked. "Mostly a man," the middleman said, and hopped down from the table, his boot heels clicking loudly on the floor. "And a little of something else." "I can't let you take her," Elmer said. "I don't know what you are, but you can't take her again."
You can't stop me, Elmer, he said. And you can't stop her either. Lindsay, my sweet girl, do you remember our rhyme?
Please don't take me,
She said.
Don't make me go.
Far in the wood, you'll find a well, he said,
Don't,
with water deep and blue.
please.
Whoever drinks by moonlight clear. Lindsay's expression grew placid, her eyes staring as if at something far away.
We'll live 1,000 years,
She said. Good girl, the middleman said. Now go wait by my truck. These gentlemen won't stop you, because if they try, they'll find out how very unpleasant I can be when I'm angry. She walked between the men and out the door. Well, I'll be taking my leave now, the middleman said. I've got to get Miss Lindsay down there for her nap, so she can finish her last little bit of growing up before I drop her off.
Why?
Kyle said.
Why make her? Why make her grow up?
The middleman looked at him, considering. Oh, okay. I guess I'll tell you a little bit. A tiny little bit. See, I get them right before puberty sets in. It makes it easier for them to forget their soon-to-be old life while they're napping the miles away. And the years. Then, when they're nice and ripe, I drop 'em off to the clients. Easy peasy.
For what?
Lewis asked. Not my concern, really, the man said. After all, I'm just a middleman. Just a regular old trucker like yourselves, taking stuff from point A to, well, to some other point. He tipped his hat to them. It's been fun, gentlemen, but for all of your respective sakes, I do hope we never cross paths again. He left, and all three men followed him out wordlessly, then watched as the middleman sauntered to his truck. It was a great beast of a truck, black and chrome, all midnight and moonlight.
Why didn't we see it earlier?
Kyle said. Elmer didn't look at the kid when he spoke. 'Cause he didn't want us to. They all watched, transfixed as the truck soundlessly drove past him, then out of the parking lot and out into the night.
Now what, Elmer?
Lewis said.
We call the police and don't say a word about anything other than finding Ray and Doreen dead.
Kyle shook his head.
We gotta say something, right? We can't just let that asshole get away.
We can, Elmer said. And we did. I've seen a lot of crazy shit during my time on the road, kid. Most of it I can chalk up to something scientific, even if I don't understand the science behind it. Unlike Lewis here, who just knows it's all some crazy alien bullshit.
Fuck you, Elmer,
Lewis grumbled. But this, Elmer continued, I can't explain this, and I ain't gonna try to explain it to the cops either. Sometimes you just gotta drive on, kid. Drink some coffee, crank some tunes, and just drive on.
That sounds like grade A bullshit to me,
Kyle said sulkily. Elmer nodded. Yeah, it does. But sometimes that's all you get, kid. Sometimes that's the only explanation you get.
Trust me, Cameron said, smiling at his wife, Diana. She looked back at him, no less worried, but he continued to lead her to the basement door. Diana hit the brakes and shook her head, her fingers slipping out of his. Cameron sighed. He looked at his wife with tenderness in his soft features. If we don't have trust now, how are we supposed to have it later? he said, smiling again. "This is going to work. I know it in my heart." Diana had tears in her eyes and a pink flush to her pale cheeks. She looked at him until she couldn't, and she looked away. It pained his heart to see her struggling like this, but he understood it. "Your heart is full of beautiful, naive, unconditional love, Cam. It's your brain I worry about. This plan feels completely crazy to me. It's reckless and dangerous, and not worth the possible consequences." Cameron turned her, making her look at him with those beautiful blue eyes. "It is worth it," he told her. "It is absolutely worth it, because it proves that the disease is controllable. I believe love will prevail, and I need you to believe in me." Diana sighed. She turned away once more and walked across the room to the window, staring out at the setting sun and the fire red it turned the sky. "This isn't a game, Cam. It's life or death. We cannot be so lax with this." Cameron still had an endearing look gleaming in his eye when he followed her to where she stood. "Of course, I know that, Diana. I think it will take something this extreme, something this powerful to prove the point. I wouldn't have suggested it if I didn't think it would work." Diana glanced over at him quickly, then returned her eyes to the window. "What about what I think?" Cameron frowned now. He put his calloused hands on her slender arms and rubbed them gently as he leaned over to lightly kiss her shoulder blade. "You know that your opinion matters to me more than anything," he said quietly into her ear. "But I also know that you are afraid. It's with good reason. But I don't want that fear to sway you. We've been together for a decade and a half. We've had something special since that day we met in the food court of the mall as teenagers. Something terrible happened, and it has made things complicated for us now. But I believe we can make it through this like we've made it through everything else. I need you to believe it too." When she turned around to face him, those blue eyes glistened with tears. "And what if I don't? What if I believe the disease is more powerful than us, than love? What then, Cam?" Cam reached up and touched her face, the side of his finger grazing her rosy cheek. He smiled once again. "Then I will prove you wrong. You just have to let me. I don't like it. I just don't. I'm so scared. If it goes wrong, it won't." Diana sighed. She took his face in both hands and kissed him, sucking gently on his top lip and then breaking away. Then she put her head down and moved past him. Cameron watched her walk to the kitchen. His finger traced where her kiss had been on his lip. He wondered if maybe he shouldn't follow her. Maybe he should let her come to this on her own. But he feared that she might actually not get there, and this was time sensitive. He could hear her in the other room fixing herself a drink. He heard her shuffling loudly through the ice cubes and then clinking them into a glass. He didn't need to see her to know she was going for the gin. It was always the gin when she was stressed like this. Cameron knew and loved all the little details of her. That was exactly why he knew his plan would work. With that in mind, he walked into the kitchen. She was leaning on the island with her elbows, sipping from a glass, a bottle of gin at her side. Cameron grinned when he saw it. "I knew it would be the gin," he said. "Just like I knew you would wear the yellow dress to your mother's funeral instead of the predetermined black gown because it was her favorite and that's what mattered to you. I knew you wouldn't get those sandals last year, no matter how much you wanted them, because you didn't actually need them and it felt wrong to buy shoes when you already had plenty. I really did appreciate that you bought those for me. I love them," she said, downing what was in her glass and hurrying to refill it. "You also felt guilty," he said, "because that's who you are. Remember when I got that new boss at work and he showed me that he was out to get me his first day there? I loved my job and I was so beside myself. What did you do?" "I told you to transfer," she said, standing up straight. "I said I'd move with you to wherever you needed to go because it meant more to see you happy." Cameron nodded. He walked around her and got a wine glass off of the hanging rack. Then he went to select a bottle. He wanted something good for tonight, something special. If things did go bad, he may as well have the good stuff and get to experience it. He chose a crisp Pinot Noir and nodded to himself, satisfied with his selection. That choice is what led us here, Diana. Not just to this town, but to this very moment. Diana wiped her eyes and turned her fearful gaze his way. Do you blame yourself? Cameron was using a corkscrew to open the bottle of wine. I suppose a little I do, he said. It's more than that, though, honey. It was love that led us here, and love that will get us through it. That's my point. Diana still looked nervous. She began to chew on her fingernail. We still have a little time, he told her. Put that down and have a glass of this with me. This wine is older than we are. It's a very expensive bottle. It was actually held onto by my grandfather and passed down to me. I've been saving it. And you want to drink it now in case there's only one of us left come morning? Diana set her glass down on the island with a sigh. No, honey. I want to drink it with you as a toast to the future. You may actually be insane. It doesn't change that you love me. You're right, and that makes me worry about my own sanity. Cameron chuckled. He turned and selected another glass from the rack. Then he poured the wine into both and picked one up, extending it to her. Diana hesitated a moment, but then she took the glass. I really do love you, she said. I wouldn't be so scared if I didn't. Cameron nodded. I know that. Now, how are we supposed to drink stuff this expensive? Don't we spit it back into the glass and not even swallow it? Diana laughed for the first time in hours. You have to swirl it first and make sure to put a pinky up like this when you drink it, she said, demonstrating. You look so sexy when you're being all sophisticated, he said with a wink, and she laughed again, shaking her head. Then he swirled his wine and took a sip. Honestly, maybe it's just me, but it tastes the same as the $30 wine I buy at the grocery store. Diana shook her head. It's you. There's so many layers to it. I taste subtle notes of berry and cocoa, as well as a delicate floral aroma that adds atmosphere to it. It's intricate and complex, yet also simple with a gentle romantic texture to it. Cameron studied his wife for a moment, searching her eyes. Are you being serious? He asked. Diana spit that expensive wine when she burst out laughing. Not at all. I don't have a clue about that stuff, but it sounded good, didn't it? Cameron laughed as well and leaned over to kiss her. Come here, he said, setting his glass down. Diana moved closer, but she kept her glass and gulped at its contents. Cameron held her snugly and nuzzled her neck. She met his embrace with her own, hugging him warmly. They kissed again. I love you, he said. Diana sighed. She laid her head on his shoulder. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. So we're doing this? If you keep asking, I'm going to think about it more and change my mind, she said with a mischievous smile. Cameron much preferred seeing her like this than seeing her so worried and sad. No matter how things went tonight, this was a small victory in itself. Duly noted, he said, snatching his glass back up and raising it. To love, to the future, and to the cellar. He shouted the last words playfully, downed his wine, and ran towards the basement. All right, slow down, you goober, Diana called out from behind him. Just because I said okay doesn't mean I'm in a rush. Cameron stopped at the basement door and looked over his shoulder at her. Unfortunately, the sky does not feel the same. Time is of the essence, my love. Even faced with death, you're so corny and ridiculous, she said back. Exactly why you love me, Cameron said, opening the basement door. Let's get this party started. He bounded down the steps like an anxious child. He was nervous, and if he was going to be honest with himself, pretty terrified. but he believed that this was going to work. He had to. He heard the steps behind him creaking as Diana made her way down. When they got to the bottom, Cameron pulled a string, and a single dim light bulb above it came aglow. Diana came up and stood beside him. They faced an enormously thick steel door together. They offered no quips or barbs this time. They just faced the door in silence. Their fingers found each other and intertwined. They took big, deep breaths together. Then Cameron nodded and stepped forward, opening the metal door. He stepped through the opening and Diana followed him over the threshold. Then he immediately closed the thick steel door and spun a wheel to lock it in place. Diana let out a quiet, nervous gasp, and he put a comforting hand on her back. "It's gonna be okay," he said soothingly. "Believe. There's no windows down here. I don't like that we can't see when it's coming," she said, her voice quivering. "We don't have to," Cameron told her reassuringly. "We'll feel it." Diana's breathing quickened. She started pacing and fidgeting. "What if it doesn't work, Cam? What if it goes wrong? What if this ends violently? Oh, God, I'm so scared right now." Cameron nodded. "It's okay to be scared, honey. It's scary. We just have to face those fears and come out the other side. We can do this. Together. I know it." "I think you might be a toxic optimist," she said, her head moving as her eyes scanned the thick stone walls of the one-time wine cellar that had been converted into a makeshift prison cell. "I don't know how you do it. I think this glass is definitely half empty, and it's going to get worse when we start getting thirsty. You should be scared too, Cam. Why aren't you scared?" Cameron laughed nervously. "Whoever said I wasn't scared? Whoever they are, they're a filthy liar. I'm completely terrified." Diana huffed. She ran her fingers through her hair and tugged at it. "Then, let's go. Let's go back up." "No," Cameron said. "I said I was scared. I didn't say I was having second thoughts. Help me with these." He walked over to two thick iron shackles that were hanging from the left wall over a beat-up old mattress. Diana didn't follow him. She resumed chewing on her fingernail. "I should have brought the alcohol down here." "It won't matter soon enough. Come on, Diana. The moon is rising." "I know. This is our last chance to change our minds. To let go of this insane romantic notion of yours." "We're not letting go of anything. Chain me up before it's too late." "I don't want to." "You have to." "Why?" "Because we need to know this thing can be controlled. We need to prove to ourselves that we are stronger than this affliction. This is the only way. Now, come on." Diana sighed, but she walked over. She picked up the heavy chains and clamped the shackles over his wrists, fastening them. Cameron tugged on them to make sure he couldn't get loose. He nodded to her. Then she bent down and did the same with his ankles. "This is so crazy," she said. Cameron jerked his arms and legs around, fighting his chains until he knew for certain that he was secured. "Okay," he said calmly, although his heart was racing. "There's no turning back now. Whatever happens, I love you." "I love you too, you crazy wild man," Diana said. She leaned forward and kissed him while he stood there, suspended by chains. "It won't be long now," Cameron said. "We didn't ask for this. It just happened, and we're lucky. The wolf could have killed, but it only bit, and that old Ford pickup sent it running. We were lucky that day, and we'll be lucky again today. Love will prevail. Let me hear you say it." "Don't make me be corny, Cam. Not right now. Please." "It's not corny. It's the answer. Come on. Look at me right now. I'm shackled to the wall. Just humor me. Say it." Diana huffed. "Love will prevail." "Can you say it like you mean it?" "You were right. I can feel it. The moon. It's happening." "I know. I can feel it too. I love you." Love will prevail. Cameron smiled. There you go. That time had a lot more heart. We're gonna make it through this, and then we're gonna go upstairs in the morning, and we're gonna have our coffee, and we're going to know that moving forward, we are more powerful as a couple than this disease is. It will not have control of us. We will have control of it. We will win, Diana. I know it. Please, just stop talking, she told him, her tears returning. We came down here a couple, but soon we will only be one person and a monster, a ravenously hungry, violent monster. We have no idea what is going to happen then. I do. No, you don't. You hope you do, but you just don't know. You can't know. This thing is wild and unpredictable. It's an animal, a beast. Oh, damn it, this was a terrible idea. It wasn't. You will see. Just wait. I know the little details of you, too, she said as she paced around the room before her chained-up husband. Cameron watched her eyes as they roamed over the walls and door, the ceiling and floor. He knew she wanted a contingency plan in case he was wrong. She was looking for a way out, a way to escape and run, and he didn't blame her. I know you go through toothpaste fast because the first glob you put on washes right off because you always turn the water on full blast by accident. I know you only like chunky peanut butter, unless it's a fluffer nutter sandwich. Then you like creamy. Because no one wants crunchy marshmallows. That's just weird. Diana laughed, sniffled, and wiped at her eyes. I know you have loved all things butterscotch since you were a child, but you never get them because you know that the scent of it alone nauseates me, and I love you so much for that. It really is the little things, isn't it? Cameron said, tears welling in his own eyes now. I still eat it when you're not around, but I brush my teeth with 2 globs of toothpaste before I see you. Diana looked at him. She laughed quietly and he joined her. They both cried and she dropped to her knees. Cameron lunged to reach out for her, but the chains restrained him, pulling him back. I love you, he shouted. Diana didn't answer. Her body went rigid and then relaxed. She spasmed and jerked. Cameron lunged for her again when her bones snapped and she screamed. He knew it was a futile effort, but he couldn't help it. Her head bent back and her jaw snapped and moved, growing before his eyes. Her teeth grew as well, rising and jutting out like so many knives. Her adjusting bones tore through her flesh, shredding it and leaving it on the basement floor. Cameron watched in amazement and horror, and the new flesh showed underneath, covered in glistening silver bristles. Her ears pulled their way up to the top of her head and stretched to points. Diana twisted and jerked before her husband's eyes as her body worked furiously to change shape. Cameron grit his own teeth. She looked like she was in absolute agony and he couldn't stand it. This process was awful and tough to stomach. Looking down to see the floor littered with his wife's beautiful skin, all the blood she lost during the transformation. It was horrible. He hated that she had to go through this. He wished it had been him instead. It broke his heart to see her in pain. When it was all over and the process was finally complete, the only thing left of the woman he loved was those sparkling blue eyes. Cameron stared at the monster that stood before him, a hulking beast of a wolf standing on all fours. He hoped with all his heart that he was right and Diana was still on the inside of that monster. He didn't speak, didn't breathe. The creature had taken his wife's place, didn't seem to notice that he was in the room yet. It had just awakened and was still getting its bearings. The wolf sniffed at the air and looked at the walls. It turned its muscled body towards the door. Cameron couldn't help but gasp when the thing leaped and slammed its giant body into the steel door with a loud bang. Cameron closed his eyes and sighed when he saw that the door held and the thing that was once his wife couldn't get free. When his eyes flicked back open, he saw that the wolf had found him. She was standing a few feet away, staring at him. Cameron could feel her hunger. Streams of steaming drool hung from her lupine lips as she snarled, low and deep. Cameron felt more afraid than he ever had in his life, but he still believed in her. He couldn't breathe or even remember how to try. It felt like there was a huge weight on his chest. His heart was pounding like it didn't care to wait for him and was ready to burst out of his chest to flee the scene. The wolf just stared at him. Was it her? Could it really be? Cameron struggled for a breath, and he felt the wolf was watching with a strange sense of curiosity. "I love you," he said, choking out the words. "I know you're hungry, so hungry, but you're stronger than that. You can do this." He felt a little bit mad trying to communicate with a wolf, but he had to try. The beast that was Diana stepped forward. Its claws clicked and clacked on the hard stone floor. Cameron swallowed a lump in his throat. His instincts were screaming at him to get free, to get out, to run. But he fought against them. He couldn't give in to those urges. If he treated her like a monster, that was what she would be. He needed to face her, to see her as his wife, as frightening of a concept as that was. He shook and trembled as the wolf drew near. The giant animal sniffed the air again and then continued closer and closer still, those crystal blue eyes staring at him so intensely. It was almost painfully hard for Cameron not to look away. Claws scraped stone. "You can do this," Cameron said. "It's not the same body, but it's still your body. It belongs to you. You are in control." The hulking beast reached him then. It stretched forward and put its snarling face right in his. Cameron shuddered. He looked at those teeth, and he didn't need anyone to tell him they could tear him to pieces in seconds with little to no effort. She was close enough now that he could feel the heat of her lupine breath moistening his cheeks. He could taste it and sense the way she ached to taste him. "You're in control," he said again, shrinking away from the creature. The wolf just pressed forward, matching him. Its wet nose touched his, and Cameron shook like he was freezing. He looked down at her, at the mere size of her incredible head. He heard the low rumble that came from her. "You're in control," he said again quietly. Tears spilled from Cameron's eyes and ran down his cheeks as he waited for the wolf to rip his throat out, to grab it in those powerful jaws and tear it free. "I love you, Diana," he said to the monster. "No matter what, I'll always love you." The wolf pulled away, leaning its head back. It howled loudly and ferociously, the sound echoing off the chamber walls. Cameron felt in that moment like his wife had been right, that the beast and her were two different beings, like he wasn't going to make it out of there or prove anything to anyone. After the howl, the wolf's big head lowered so that it could stare him in the eye once more over its muzzle of jagged razor teeth. Those bright blue eyes met his, and then the beast pulled away. It turned from him and padded its way across the room, where it turned in a slow circle and laid on the floor against the door. Cameron found his breath and went slack, losing his legs. He hung there in those chains, exhausted but satisfied. "I knew it," he said quietly. "I knew it." Cameron didn't know if she would make it the whole night, if she would be able to resist all the way until the sun rose in the morning. But she had shown enough that she would know either way that the beast could be controlled. He slunk down and knelt on the mattress below him, watching the monster by the door that watched him in turn. "I trust you," he said to her. The wolf answered by eyeing him with a penetrating gaze. It gave a low snarl that made Cameron jump and tug on his restraints. It was going to be a long night, but it was worth it to Cameron, to prove to his wife that she was stronger than her sickness. The night was young, but he believed in her. He believed in love. He believed in tomorrow. He had to. Cameron startled awake, amazed that he had somehow fallen asleep while sharing space with a monster he couldn't run from. "That monster is your wife," he reminded himself. His heart was racing, but when he looked over, the wolf was still curled by the door, and he sighed with relief at the sight. This was his plan, and Diana had aggressively resisted it because she didn't trust herself. And that was why Cameron had known it was so necessary. He could still remember the night she was bitten. It was raining, and she had been trying to make it home from work, driving slowly. She had him on speakerphone because the rain was coming down hard and he knew visibility would be terrible. Then she saw the body in the road. Cameron had been asking frequent questions, but she answered none of them aside from telling him that she didn't hit anyone. "But I almost ran them over," she said next. "They're just lying face down in the road. I'm going to see if they're alive. Call for help." "I'll call when you're back in the car and I know you're all right." "I can call myself then," Diana said with obvious irritation. Then a car door slammed, and Cameron's heartbeat matched it. He sat with his phone staring at the window and the rain that hit so hard he was convinced it would break. He was willing her to return, to be okay. Then he heard her scream and he gasped, squeezing his phone. Cameron was asking over and over if she was all right, begging her to tell him what was happening. The phone call disconnected. When Diana had made it home that night, Cameron was already outside in the deluge waiting on her with no jacket. He ran towards the headlight beams that cut through the rain. He was about to go looking for her despite not knowing what road she was on or where on that road she was. He couldn't bear to wait any longer. Then the lights sliced through the downpour and he gasped and ran towards them. He didn't realize at the time that Diana was injured. Between the wound, the fear, and the rain, she couldn't see him at all, and she hit him with the car, throwing him to the pavement, where he blacked out. It was Cameron that woke up in the hospital bed with broken ribs, a sprained ankle, and a concussion. One of the broken ribs had punctured a lung. Diana was sitting next to him holding his hand. "I'm so sorry," she told him. Cameron remembered that moment, the confusion, the fear, the headache. He blinked and stared at her, memories of her scream bellowing in his mind. "What happened? What happened to you?" he asked. She had just stared at him for a moment, her eyes lost in her own memories, her face a mask of fear. "Tell me," he pleaded. "You said there was a body. I heard you scream, Diana. I need to know." She looked around the room to make sure there were no prying ears, and then she told him about the wolf. The person in the road was long past dead, and they hadn't been hit by a car. Their throat had been torn away, their blood cascading in a river across the rain-soaked street. Diana heard the growl and looked up to see the animal that had killed the man at her feet. Even though it was on all fours, the size was intimidating. She could see even in the pouring rain that the animal was bigger than she was. Its golden eyes fixed on her, and its lips peeled back in a snarl that showed her the giant jagged teeth lining its enormous jaw. She didn't hesitate. She ran for the car. Diana had closed the door because of the rain, so she had to open it, and that split second was enough for the monster to spring forward and grab the meat of her calf with those teeth. That was the scream Cameron had heard through the phone she had reached for and dropped onto the rain-soaked street, ending the call. She knew if she let the creature drag her away, she was as dead as the man she almost ran over. "I pulled away, let my own leg tear, to escape. Be glad you didn't hear the rest of the screams," she told him. She got in and slammed the door and hit the gas with her bleeding leg. She screamed in agony as she sped home, losing blood. Then she screamed one last time when Cameron appeared before her and she couldn't stop in time. "Let me see your leg," Cameron said. "They fixed it?" "They didn't have to," Diana said with a frown, her mouth quivering like she was going to cry. "It repaired itself. I don't know how. I don't understand anything that happened. I thought I killed you." When the day came that she first turned, their physical wounds had all long gone and they were just working to get over the emotional trauma of it all. Cameron hadn't seen her turn. He'd actually thought that the wolf had come back for her. It was a crazy thought, but still more rational than what had actually transpired. He looked for her for hours before finding her back at home, naked on the doorstep, covered in blood that wasn't her own. Diana had been suicidal after that. She told him of her experience and how she had no control. She had been there, but it was like she was watching through the keyhole of a door as the wolf that now owned her had torn someone to pieces, eaten them. She vomited as she recalled the tale. Cameron had simply listened and rubbed her back, put her in the bathtub, and helped clean off the blood. He knew after that if she didn't find a way to control the beast, she was going to die. He was going to lose her, and he wasn't ready to. He knew if there was anyone she would fight for, she would resist the monster to keep from killing. It was him. That's when he devised the plan to put himself on a platter for her. She couldn't escape that room, so no one else was in danger, and she would learn how to control the wolf instead of being controlled by it. It's the only way, he had said. I can't. Diana wouldn't even look at him. I almost killed you once. I'm not going to finish the job. No, you're not. That's the point. You need to see that, to understand your own personal power. You have to trust me. I don't trust myself. Exactly, and you need to in order to beat this thing. I know you. I trust you. It's going to work. Diana had snarled like the wolf that hid within her then. Cameron made sure not to jump or even flinch. He couldn't for a single moment show any fear of her. He knew she would run with that, and his plan would be trashed. He just frowned and took a slow, deep breath to calm his nerves. You weren't there, with me, inside the beast, she told him, the anger still adding an edge to her voice. You don't know what it felt like to be trapped inside and watching the violence. If that had been you on the other end. Cameron had watched the anger leave her then. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. It won't be, he said quietly. You won't let it. But you need that push. Please, don't do it because you believe in me, Diana. Have faith in yourself. I just don't know. He had continued working on it until the next full moon, the night the beast in her would rise again. Tonight. Watching her turn had been agonizing. He could only imagine what it had been like for her to experience. He flinched again, just remembering the sound of her breaking bones. She hadn't killed him, though. At least not outright. Now he looked over at the slowly moving body of the resting wolf curled up by the door with sympathy instead of fear. He wished he could walk over and lay with her, wrap his arms around her furry torso. It was probably for his benefit in this instance that the shackles kept him from doing so. Instead, he let his body fall relaxed, and he allowed himself to doze once more. This time it was the feeling of being watched that made his eyes flick open. The eyes stared directly into his, made his breath catch in his chest. He could hear the sniffing nose nearby and taste the wolf's sour breath. Cameron knew it had to be hungry, maybe even desperate for a kill. It was no ordinary animal that possessed a human. It was something far more sinister. Something demonic. Cameron was trembling. He could feel the tips of the wolf's claws dragging over his chest and stomach, gently for the moment. But for how long? Cameron moved his arms slowly, the chains jingling with his effort. He let his hands find the wolf's soft fur, and he let his fingers sink in. He massaged like he would a pet dog. The beast rumbled, and Cameron fought not to jerk his hands away. He spoke calmly and quietly in as soothing a tone as fear would allow him when he said, You don't want to hurt me. That's the last thing you want to do. You know me. You love me, Diana. You love me. The wolf jerked out of his grasp then, rising to its full height, almost a foot taller than Diana stood in her human form. It reared back and howled loudly, body rigid with tensed muscles. Then it moved. It was so fast that Cameron wasn't able to restrain the gasp. It was a blur of fur as the beast's arm slashed towards him. The claws on his giant right paw cut through one of the chains and dropped Cameron awkwardly to the mattress. He landed on his shoulders strangely and grimaced in pain, but his eyes remained focused on the thing that had been his wife only hours ago. He spoke her name quietly in repetition like a mantra against the terror that gripped him. The wolf looked down at him and snarled, shaking its head rapidly back and forth like it was trying to tear something only it could see. Then it turned and flew towards the door. The metal creaked and groaned against its weight as they collided. The wolf dove back and charged the door again. It continued to use its own body as a battering ram, howling and snarling wildly as Cameron looked on in horror. He was beginning to wonder if the door would hold. Finally, the beast relaxed and slumped back to the ground. Cameron couldn't help but wonder if it was actually trying to escape, or if that had been Diana forcing the monster to focus its anger somewhere else. He stood so he could look at the watch on his still shackled wrist. It was 4 a.m. There were only a few hours of night left. When the sun rose, Diana would return to him. "We're gonna make it," he thought. "We're gonna make it." There was no way Cameron was going to fall back to sleep, so he leaned against the wall and just watched. He watched his wife doing what he knew she was capable of, regaining control, overpowering the animal. After a few minutes, the wolf got back to its feet and it just walked in slow circles. Then it laid back down. A little while later, it was up again. It paced and walked, claws clacking on the ground. Then it lost it and slammed against the door again, over and over, just like before. Cameron's heart ached as he watched this song and dance. Tears filled his eyes. Diana was trying so hard. She was fighting. He loved her with every ounce of himself. When the wolf relaxed this time, there was blood on the door. Cameron cringed at the sight. He hoped she didn't kill herself trying not to kill him. "No, we're gonna make it," he told himself. Minutes later, she was up again, pacing and snarling. Cameron wanted to tell her it was okay, to talk her down and tell her to be calm, but he knew that she was walking a thin line and just speaking could send her his way in a fury, so he bit his tongue. He grit his teeth as the wolf collided with the door over and over. It was so full of rage and violence. He sighed when she finally relaxed and fell back to the floor. Silently, he pleaded for her assault on the door to be finished. For a while, it seemed that it was. Then she rose again, and this time she skipped the pacing and just went right at the wall of steel blocking her exit. The giant animal launched itself at the door again and again, and the bangs echoed through the room. The metal groaned and the blood stain spread. Cameron couldn't take it anymore. He screamed, "Stop!" The animal did as he asked, paused, still as can be, on its raised-up haunches, but hunched over, its back curled like a rainbow. Slowly it turned its head towards him and snarled. "Please stop," Cameron pleaded. "Please." The wolf showed its impossible speed again when it spun around and launched itself his direction. Before he even understood what was happening, the other chain was severed and Cameron was collapsing to the mattress below him. He was glad that he made the decision to put it there, or he would have hit the ground hard. Cameron's ears were filled with the wolf's roar of unbridled anger. Then it was on him. Its giant paws pinned his shoulders and it stared down into his eyes. Drool poured from those ferocious teeth onto his face. "It's me," he said to the snarling monster. "It's me, Diana. It's me." But Cameron saw no recognition in those predatory eyes, only hunger. The wolf's tongue emerged and lapped at the air. Its nose moved and jumped as it sniffed at him. Cameron closed his eyes and waited for death. He heard horrible sounds then. There were roars of hunger and pain, sounds like slabs of meat being dropped out of a bucket onto the floor, furious snapping and crunching, scraping nails on stone, moans and a strange slithering like wet snakes wrestling in a lake of blood. Cameron opened his eyes just as a naked Diana fell upon him. He took a sharp breath. Diana was unconscious and obviously injured, but she was alive. He could feel the moving of her chest as she breathed above him. The sun had risen, and they were both alive. Cameron just wrapped his arms around his wife's naked form and he held her, so relieved to feel the contours of her flesh and not animal fur. He kissed her bruised, swollen forehead. "I knew you could do it," he whispered. "I knew you would. I knew it." Diana's only response was a quiet snore, her shoulders moving up and down as she slept soundly upon his chest. Cameron took a deep breath. and his head fell back to the mattress. One hand rubbed his wife's back, and the other ran gently through her hair as he stared up at the ceiling. I love you.
$6746W. Synopsis. I call it the airing cupboard, the room in which I counsel former doctors suspended for breaking down on the job. You see, I'm a stuff-up. I'm on probation from the review board and don't know if I'll ever be allowed to walk the wards as a medical doctor again. A failure. Because I fell in love with training. I fell in love with Maya. I fell in love with partying. And we both fell in love with the deadly drug fentanyl. Until one of us fell in too deep. Dr. Georgian, whose young brain is so big it seems to enlarge her head, has been experiencing a condition she claims is nymphomania, though that's a non-clinical term best avoided. The closest clinical term which could describe Dr. Georgian's decision to have sex with patient in the physiotherapy spa pool is hypersexuality. Or call it plain old depression. Not that it's easy to get a doctor of 25,000 hours experience to admit she has depression, nor any other flaws. Dr. Georgian is reciting the short story I made her write from her tablet. Creative writing is a tool I utilize in the airing cupboard to get my broken doctors to look at their problems objectively. The airing cupboard is the church hall in which my kintsugi gather around me on Tuesday and Thursday mornings to air their angst, to release, to glue their broken shards together with gold. A reminder that they once hurled themselves against something hard and broke apart. Dr. Georgian keeps stopping, putting her tablet down and looking at me to see if I'm satisfied yet. I can tell she's staring at my black eye, thinking I'm the one who's fucked up. The truth is we're all fucked up. Every doctor in the room finds it hard to admit why they're here, airing out their guilt. The head of the review board has ordered every one of my patients to complete therapy sessions in St. Luke the Evangelist Community Hall. The alternative? Never work in medicine again. Doctor, I gotta head off in a couple minutes, Dr. Anson complains, rearranging his shaky, shivering limbs, sitting up and flexing his cramped back. A person gets shakes and cramps when their body chemistry decides it can't exist without the 17 carbon atoms, 19 hydrogens, 3 oxygens, and single nitrogen cherry on top, which, when artfully arranged, make up the hydromorphone we know as dilaudid. I can barely grow a beard and haven't lived long enough to get a driver's license, but I know opioids. I know what Dr. Anson is going through. Tell us why you got a black eye, he says. The group nods along with him. You weren't always a therapist, were you, Doc? We shared, now you share. How come you get beaten up all the time? If you leave early, Dr. Anson, that's 2 hours you've completed with me, not 3. And that's on you. Guys, you have to do your 99 hours the same as me. Undoctored and 99 for you, Doc, so we heard. I hold my hand up to say, be patient. I roam the circle of broken doctors as if we were playing duck, duck, goose. For years, you brought the dead back to life. The highest training for the highest salary and for the highest stakes. You learned you were infallible. I learned you had to bury feelings of inadequacy. You became more skilled than 99.9% of people in the world. But because you skipped the part of your development where you became at peace with your human flaws, you fuck up. Deep down, you want to get expelled from the Board of Registration. You hate triple shifts. You mess up, and they chastise, berate, and discipline you. But they don't sack you, because they don't want you to quit the hospital, because then they would lose power over you. So, the Board of Reviewers sends you here, because you're a sensitive person trapped in an insensitive profession. and you don't know a way out. Their bulging eyeballs tell me they're not used to being confronted like this, like Maya's eyes when she saw I was going to heaven without her. But my broken doctors are too sensitive. Too sensitive is why I tightly wound Dr. Georgian, filleted an elderly heart surgeon at his retirement function. Too sensitive is why hospital reporter Dr. Choi started tweeting the salaries of 143 hospital board executives before security tackled him off of his office chair. Too sensitive is why Dr. Chiamanda sewed her cell phone inside a patient because she was sleepwalking during the day, because she had been up all night on a treadmill, because the staff marathon team convinced her that a single ounce of body fat was unacceptable. Dr. Anderson hoarded breast augmentation photos. Dr. Mona burgled an ambulance. And Dr. Patchouli tasted the blood of an 8-year-old boy because it was Runa, rarest in the world, sacred, precious. Dr. Cruz hoards stainless steel tools. Dr. Rude steals Salisbury steaks from patients' meals. I look at the old cuckoo clock on the oak-paneled wall of St. Luke's. We have 2 more broken doctors to read their simple stories before we can conclude our session. If Supervisor Dr. Selby Chan finds out about my broken docs, I have yet to do exactly 99 hours of therapy within 3 months. They'll be asked to redo their hours from scratch. I'll have to redo my own hours too. As they plead with their eyes to find out whether the session is really over, whether they have advanced another 3% towards returning to the wards, I come close to blurting to them how I broke and became Kintsugi. I know they gossip about me. Final thought of the day, I say, changing the subject. We all feel we deserve to be hurt, but do we actually deserve that? Write me a 20-line acrostic poem in your books, please. Discuss Thursday. Be good to yourself this week. You can go. I shelter in a corner of the room. Dr. Chan has left a voicemail in the courteous, cold voice he uses to tell high achievers they are unsatisfactory to him. He says the review board is ready to see me, to see if me and the Dockside Council can be glued together with gold. My broken docs. People with student loans close to $200,000, most of them. They're offering to clean my house and wax my car so long as I can get them Category 1 restricted permission to conduct medical duties on hospital grounds. Well, 50% of them, that is. Dr. Chan is looking to accept the immediate return of 50% of broken doctors to practicing, so long as the savings they bring to the board outweigh the cost of lawsuits. The board will read out their list of cracked clinicians they want back in service. I'll counter with the doctors I think are ready to return. And as he strokes his gray wizard beard at the head of the table, I'll tell Dr. Chan and Dr. Claire Georgian's clinical depression is attributable to a hormonal malfunction from a damaged pituitary gland, which at first hemorrhaged estrogen and cortisol. Then I'll book Dr. Georgian an urgent brain scan. When I finish checking my voicemails and fantasizing about the fight ahead, my broken docs are still in their chairs, their arms folded. That busted eye, it's turning green, Dr. Abdil smirks. The hematoma occurred 72 hours ago. There's 10 minutes on the clock, Doc, and you're limping too. How come you're so hurt? You have to tell us. I walk on thick, resistant legs to the end of the warehouse, walled with wooden bins full of fruit. We're so deep in the warehouse that seeing what's going on from the street is impossible. I fist bump a guy from South Sudan with black skin that seems to glow blue. I've heard he grew up in fighting rings, breaking other kids' faces when he was 5. After he got his refugee stuff approved, he was actually a medical student here, but couldn't get his student visa extended. So now he's fighting to make his living. He's tossed away his passport, He doesn't even resemble his photograph anymore, because the bones of his face have been dented like an eggshell. Maya first brought me here to school. She got a thrill out of this place. Maya always wanted to be smashed to pieces. She felt guilty for being statuesque with blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, a ballet dancer's body, terrific parents, and a hard-to-achieve degree that put her on top of a lonely mountain of expectation. I'm told there's a space for me in the cage in 30 minutes, that I can warm up, watch fights, whoop, roar, and throw fruit at the cage. The 3 skirmishes I watch are over in 4 minutes. That's how hard people hit each other here. 2 deadlocked women, skinny, with strange wobbling breasts, claw at each other. One has been practicing Muay Thai, evidently, and cripples the other with a knee to the jaw before putting an arm bar on her opponent till she stops twitching. The referee looks out from the cage, lasering through the audience until his eyes meet mine, but I shake my head momentarily. I can't help her. I'm not allowed to be a doctor here. 2 gang members, one a man-barrel with a stomach that wobbles like an ocean, the other almost 7 feet tall and reeking of cigarettes so bad I can smell him from outside the cage, grapple till they collapse, sleepy and slippery. The tall one vomits blood. A janitor limps in with a mop and bucket. Then Epic and Mega, the big bald twins who run the show, find me in the audience. Epic taps my shoulder with a finger as hard as wood. Just checking in on you, pal. I'm going up tonight, definitely. You positive you want to do this again? Are you a little vulnerable? I was comfy for too long. I need the hurt. The man who shuffles into the ring from the opposite side of the cage is an obese ball man with pale patches across his tits. Those are blooms of a fungus known as Pityriasis versicolor. I want to tell them. His body's constant sweatiness provides fertile ground for that stuff to bloom on the epidermis. I want to put him on Fungisil. I want to get my prescription pad back. You'll have to keep your body as doctory as possible while applying it twice a day over 28 days, my friend. Dab it on like so. Best after you're freshly showered. And I'd like to recommend a dietitian too. An asteroid slams into my brain. Everything is moving in slow motion. His fist has gone around the side of my daydreaming head and smashed my ear. He crosses the ring and slaps his wobbling arms around me. I'm Dr. Unk, exhausted and nauseous. I want to cry and collapse. Tinnitus I'll never hear again. I glimpse Sudan in the crowd with his little finger on his lips whistling. Throw in everything he's saying. Wriggle, squeal, scratch, bite. Come out of this, Doc. I don't have kids or a cat to go home to. My parents are dead. All I've got is my airing cupboard and my clients. So I growl back into the fight, headbutt the fat man, and both our noses explode because I have to be punished. After all, when you put someone in an anesthetic coma, they lie on edge between here and gone. I took Maya to the edge because she told me she wanted to see the view. Right up on the edge, all the way, millimeters away, then right on the razor blade. And then she was gone. And for that, I deserve to be hurt. 5th year. After 4 years of lectures, exams, and parties, and trying to hold on to being like all the other 22-year-olds, my class and I split up across the country to do our residencies in real hospitals. The 5th year, shit got real. No more sneaking away from our tutors to go and smoke. No more acting like we didn't have to look after ourselves. I got assigned to Middleman. The place was a factory. 1,000 beds, 30 theaters, 3 sites, 5,000 staff. 500,000 patients a year. And there was me, the bee in the hive, regretting I didn't get out earlier. I and some other kids moved into this crumbling old red brick dormitory in Otahu with fancy arches and stained glass. We were close to a Samoan butchery, a Rarotongan bottle shop, and an Afghani bakery. We helped out on the wards. We sat in on consultations. Old ladies stopped us on the street for praise, as if we were real legitimate docs. Old gambling addicts bought us beers and praised us docs. My people and I limped into the tavern every morning at 10 for karaoke and to suck shots from 100-milliliter syringes. My first week in med dorm, I discovered my popularity wasn't just a high school phenomenon. I'd smashed every exam at school, and I played center in the A-team for the inter-school soccer, and still found time to get merit or excellence on all my exams and keep friends and learn about sex with a group of safe, clean kids. When people found out anesthesia was my major, they knew I was lining myself up for an extreme climb with some of the highest standards, keeping people on the live side of death. Challenging, sure, but I'd never settled for anything less. We tried to get through a week at a time. We had a party to balance every exhausting assessment. In the halls, we had to prove ourselves by doing an IV stand, while the boys on scholarships from Tehran and Tokelau whooped it up, everyone wearing scrubs and disposable smocks. The girls went as hard on their IV stands as we did. The IV stand was like a keg stand, except there was an intravenous delivery with 3-liter bags of $10 wine hanging off of it. Dr. Jody, Dadu, did a tour of the dorms early in the night to check we were still alive, but instead of scolding us, he just doctor-upped a bunch of cricket jokes and made a conversation about Shane Wayne versus Brian Lara, and kissed the girls' cheeks and called them Betty. It meant daughter. Johnny Krishnan told me. That's what we were to Dr. Jody. We were his beloved kids. He would tisk and chide, but he would forgive us for the occasional blowout. Dadu Jody trusted us. This really tall girl, Maya, was strong enough to hold my legs vertically all by herself while I went to work sucking on a liter of wine. I could hardly concentrate. I stared up at her tree trunk legs and her muscular chest. I puked before she could tip me the right way up, and the fizzy, bubbly wine puke bile went into my nose, and they had to let me down so my airway wasn't blocked. And as I writhed in a lake of bile, the acronym for the procedure for a blocked-up airway flashed behind my eyes like a billboard. Puked up chunks of pineapple pizza stuck to my dick, hanging out from my meager gown. Maya stood over me, guzzling Jägermeister and laughing at my corpse. But the boys' slaps, pats, and noogies told me I was in. I'd passed the piss-up test. They hauled me up and applauded. I crowd-surfed. We raced each other to be the first to name the 12 stages in a ventilator inspection checklist while necking 12 shots of rum. An hour later, I was asleep in the bathroom on a pile of moldy laundry. I was wasted, but not wasted enough to override the switch in my brain that told me to wake at dawn and annihilate everyone who thought they were smarter than me. Especially Maya, with her fail comment every time I got the Incus and Malleus ear bones mixed up. When the dawn alarm dinged on my phone, I stood, washed my dick in the basin with hand soap, and reconstructed what had happened last night. Maya on the floor behind me looked like a dropped marionette. I kneeled over her and studied the movement of her slumbering lips. Her esophageal tract was cramped. I adjusted her head and brushed a sticky curl away from her brow. I hovered my lips over hers. I nearly kissed her while she slept. She was in paradise, though. Wherever she was, she would be happy. No triathlons, no supervisors, no swatting or blood types and allergens and lipid oxygen bonding precipitors. No senior doctors in her dreams were yelling at her hard enough to shake her hair. No guilt, no shame, no hunger. just unconscious bliss. Instead of kissing those lips, I draped a towel over her, stepped into fresh beach shorts and jandals and a Hawaiian shirt I found on the floor of some dude snoring in a bedroom with 3 naked med students piled around him. I walked to my grand round, picking bits of bacon out of my ears. Dr. Harkenwall Jody, godfather of anesthesiology, was in the front of the meeting room, illuminated by the projector, asking everyone if they could explain the TCSC of having an airway blocked. TCSC. Total Combined Status Circuit? No, consequences. Everything in anesthesia is a consequence. I stuck my hand up. Everybody stared at me as I answered. Kids in class. When the esophagus is blocked, like even just 10% is going to stop you being able to aspirate your carbon dioxide, I ventured. So that CO2's going to line your bronchioles like cholesterol or something. The CO2 makes the muscle in your airway all thick and saggy till it almost closes. Real bad if you're obese. You said we're supposed to flag it as a code orange compound complication in pre-op. Mr. Delight. Dr. Godfather clapped and grinned so wide I saw a flash of gold. CO2 every child. 2 particles of oxygen and 1 of carbon. Dear friend, the oxygen we need in the air we breathe. Tell me something, child. Tell me something really important. Tell me how many one-day international test caps MS Donny is having, child. I picked a shard of vomit from the yellow stubble on my lip. 156? 158. Nerd. Somebody threw a drink bottle against my head. Insufficient! Dr. Jody slapped his desk. He grinned wickedly. 156 milligrams of sodium pentothal, patient stable. With 2 more milligrams, we are taking the patient to 158. Mister, is the patient stable? Patient critical, I mumbled and hung my head. Maya limped in towards the end, just when Dr. Jody talked about the rhesus negative tests, absorbed opioids compared to the Rh positive blood. She showered, put on a miniskirt and heels, and even wore her stethoscope. A waft of fruity shampoo went up as she sat in front of me, blocking me with broad, sporty shoulders. Amaya was blocking out the presentation, blocking the adulation from our godfather. Down in front, I whispered. She half turned her head and sneered. Fuck you. Make me. She winked out of the corner of her eye and said in a low voice, Get to the top of Mount Aspiring before me. I'll fuck you. I'd never found anyone as competitive as me until I met Maya. We were obsessed with one-upping each other. A dancer since the age of 4, Maya was 2 inches taller than me, even without high heels, which she put on at least once a week when she dragged me to another social. We'd drive up to her dad's yacht club and suck oysters out of the shell in massive swish glasses of Chardonnay. Then the next night, she'd have box fit with a couple of the girls from our rheumatology group and go clubbing afterwards, and I'd limp behind her, unable to match her shot for shot, and watch in a corner with folded arms while she zigzagged on stage, her huge hips bumping against her friends. There were only 168 hours in each week. Still, she seemed to fit in 50 hours of tramping, 50 hours of volunteer hearing and vision checks on poor kids in the ghetto, 50 hours of partying and fine dining, and not to mention 50 hours networking with the Silverbacks, so she would have her first hospital career lined up after she graduated. Lined up before me. That's what it was all about with Maya. She liked me, as I was a threat she could stay ahead of. We had sex in a long drop toilet buzzing with flies as soon as we got back to the hut where we'd left all the other med students who couldn't keep up. The first time we kissed was with blue, numb lips on the summit of Mount Aspiring, shivering, trying to find each other over the screeching wind that sucked the flapping jackets off our skin. Every other time we made love after that, there were 3 of us present. Maya, me, plus an enhancer, some tingly lubricant or a bottle of schnapps or a pill or a canister of nitrous oxide she'd smuggled in her pussy. In our 10th lovemaking session, Maya pulled out a bag of weed and a pipe. We knew we could both hold out for longer when we were stoned. That was part of the race. The time after that, Maya slipped a bright, shiny 80 milligram circle of OxyContin between my lips, and I couldn't stop falling through the clouds. She used her strong arms to hold me inside her, while turbulence tried to flap my body away. I was skydiving towards the landscape of her body, and my ears hummed, and when I slammed into the mattress, I came so hard it felt like my heart was being sucked down into my stomach and shot right through her. I panted for 10 minutes afterwards. By 12 minutes, I got Maya to use her heart check monitor to confirm my BPM was coming down. The oxy made us move slowly and forget everything as soon as it happened. Maya found her heart check amongst drawers and drawers full of stuff she'd swiped from the wards. Stuff she didn't even need, like speculums, scalpels, and marrow scrapers. "Babe," I gasped, clutching the white sheet against my heaving chest. "Oh my God, that's gotta be the best shit on the planet." That's a fail. Carfentanil is the best shit on the planet. She slowed her breathing so she wouldn't seem as exasperated as me. "You have got to get some." "I wish. 10 mils will get you high. 50 milligrams will kill you. Only Dr. Jody can get you a script." Before I knew it, she'd pushed a pill inside me again. A different one this time. A little gray square, like a Lego piece. Maya put her hands on her ankles and wrapped them around my ears. Her vulva looked like a ripening orchard. Her thighs were huge pale petals. Clitoral hood, clitoris, labia minora, urethral opening, vaginal opening, perineum. That one was dilated, by the way. "It'll get you toasted," she sang, laughing, knocking a bottle of champagne off the side table. She grabbed a hunk of my hair and mashed my face into her orchid. "Hurry up already. I'm way ahead of you." I was a ton of bad things. Drunk on exhaustion, addicted to coffee and cycling after punishing myself for staying up till 2 a.m. memorizing chemical compounds and their antidotes. But I had to let everyone know I wasn't a narc. Well, I was and I wasn't. I was on top of everything. I could dob Maya into Dr. Selby Chan's board of review in a heartbeat, or party just as hard as Maya. Either way, I showed the world only what I wanted them to see. I would drink 6 jugs at a grassroots rural medical club garden party and still wobble home on my bike alive. I would hold my liquor deep inside me, metabolize it, beat the intoxicant, piss it out, glug another triple shot espresso, and bike another 20 miles. I passed the breath tests. I put blankets on trainee interns sleeping shirtless and shivering on the clubhouse balcony. I watched over them while they slept, making other people comfortable, tucking them in. It was all part of being superior. Nothing was better than outlasting Maya, especially when she'd had a screaming match over the phone when her mother wouldn't release any more money from Maya's trust fund, and Maya would try to drink herself into a coma to stick it to her mum. With no idea what to do outside the wards, bored in our apartment, we would race to see who could pour a bottle of tequila into 25 shot glasses and down it all. If you spilled a drop, you had to lick it up. I loved it when Maya staggered around on her hands and knees and then collapsed. I would get a cloth and wipe her face, and then use a glass bottle to keep the 7 cervical vertebrae on her neck straight and whisper in her ear, "Beat ya." She would try to kill herself, and I would one-up her by keeping her alive. Then I would kiss her while she slept. 6th year. From the moment I locked my bike until I left the hospital, my days were about waiting for disaster to strike, and then feeling a sting of excitement or disappointment as another day went disaster-free. I was amazing at my job, and a career would be waiting for me as soon as I graduated. With their pathetic 3-year degrees, the little squeaky anesthetic technicians always joked about us sleep doctors being like air traffic controllers. Depress the plunger of the syringe, the plane takes off. Watch the monitor for hours, putting your nose to the lips of the patient. Plane lands. Time to wake up, sleepyhead. Applause, occasionally, if Dr. Jody read out the printout and saw our patients had avoided tachycardia. Like the other gazes we get rid of when we exhale, almost all the anesthetic passing through a person's blood separates the good compounds from the lungs and aspirates through a patient's cool lips. The best part of the job is a free snifter of something special, and on the job, too. If I leaned in close to a patient's nose, I could toke on a sneaky snifter of relaxation when the surgeons weren't looking. Just between the patient and me, our little secret. If Dr. Jody wasn't trailing behind me demanding reports on cricket or cardio, I would lock myself in the dispensary so I could sign out drugs without being interrupted. Patients' half-used drug bottles on my trolley, supposedly headed for the incinerator, personal bottles up my ass. Maya and I would bump into each other in the corridors and walk funny, wide and uncomfortable, like John Wayne. Howdy, partner. We'd wink at each other, smile, and kiss as if we had enough gear to give us a good day off. Didn't matter if I was sitting in on the surgery, doing pre-op checks or post-op, filling out timesheets, or just sitting through grand rounds. As little as half a tab of paracodeine would melt the anxiety away. Just hearing the names of the drugs on the patient's notes made me relax. They sounded divine. Dilaudid made me think of eyelids snapping open and irises dribbling color from 100 Crayolas left in the rain. Isoflurane sounded so laboratory pure that I wouldn't be responsible for whatever it did to my body. The hard industrial dare of desflurane. The stay away I'm powerful of sevoflurane. Demerol made me imagine crisp, clean white things. Vecuronium sounded like a Roman noble. Risperidol, a breath of fresh air. Fentanyl sounded like a fountain of bliss. Maya and me were only in the apartment at the same time a couple days a week, but she would always leave my meds taped to the bathroom mirror if she scored first. I thought about fucking other girls, but there wasn't anyone who spiced up sex like Maya. Besides, any other girl in the world would judge me for the way I chose to relax. If Maya and I caught up for a box of noodles before the movies, we would run codes as we cycled to the cinema. What's code purple, hotshot? Failure to respond. Aspirate. What's code square, then? Allergic reaction to augmentin. Code black. Suffocating. Who was the first batsman to score a double century in ODI? Sachin Tendulkar, bitch. You sound just like Dadu. Lol. It was a rainy Saturday, and everybody on the planet was watching the World Cup when Dr. Jody presented me with a lab coat with my name embroidered on the breast pocket. I slumped against him like we were embracing, lay my head on his shoulder and thanked him. I had so much morphine in my blood that I couldn't open my eyes wide enough to make eye contact. You sleepy, BT? Sorry, Dr. Jody. Just trying to keep up with you. He patted my shoulder. You need to rest for the first 11 this Saturday, no? We take Canterbury District Health Board. We killed them. We hugged and laughed. Be good to yourself, my boy. Unwind. Last night, Maya had put a red light bulb in the bedside lamp, shot me up with 20 milligrams of propofol, and pulled me into some red, sweaty swamp I didn't come out of for days. I am unwinding, Doc. I promise. I ran the shower and used my 10 private minutes to push a tiny 16-gauge needle between my hallux toe and index toe, singing distal, proximal, we won't forget 'em all. My medicine cooled my boiling bones, and my body thanked me straight away. It told me I had needed this all my life. I'd never even had alcoholism in my family tree. Still, as I watched the shower water bead on my skin, and I drank it and gargled it and tried to snatch steam fairies from the air, giggling like kindergarten, there was a voice crawling around in the back of my skull, whispering, "This has always been in you." Dilaudid is more powerful than any gas, and propofol is more powerful still, but only fentanyl will get you into heaven. The shower steam danced with the helices of my DNA and popped, fizzed, slithered into my toes, wriggled into my balls, and pushed on my prostate gland. I fell backward into the bath and delighted in the pink food coloring swirling into the water, pooling in my belly button. I staggered back into the sober world when I heard the crack of a whip, and I sat upright. The strobe light switched off, and the 200 frames per second I'd been watching slowed, and I decided the folded-armed woman in front of me wearing a scowl and trembling lips was Maya. She was mad and upset because I cracked my skull and lain in the bathtub till the hot water ran freezing and I'd turned purple. What really pissed her off was I'd done drugs without her. And she had a shift beginning in 10 minutes, and she was going to have to go to work cold, fucking sober. Flames were shooting out of my cheekbones where she'd slapped me, but I was somehow dry, as if she'd slapped the shower off of me. I was in a white ward, a hospital. God damn it. And there was a cotton bandage around my skull. Maya, immaculate in a $600 dress her mum had paid for, leaned close to my ear. Tight, tucked-in sheets meant I couldn't move my arms. Her lips brushed my ear as she pretended to kiss me. It would be the first kiss in weeks. We never made love anymore, just injected each other's spines and writhed in our damp bed, masturbating, and slept for days. She squeezed my scalp. "I'm gonna pay you back for this, you little prick." Dr. Jody entered, glowering, shaking his grumpy musk all over. Maya kissed and squeezed him extra hard. Fucking try hard. "What's the process for discarding vials of fentanyl once drawn, eh? Speak, boy. You are naming for me 12 risk factors when administering epidurals to an epileptic. Who is the vice captain of the Bangladeshi, Who's thrown more overs, Yasir Shah or Kuldeep Yadav?" He shifted his gaze to Maya. "You, miss, you are taking care of mister?" "Oh, we've spoken," she hissed through her fangs. "Next time he does something this stupid, he knows he could die." 7th year. Patient Priyanka M. had trouble relaxing the lower half of her body to let her baby out. I elbowed the nurses aside and rubbed topical anesthetic in a delicate rainbow pattern across her back, whispering susurrations. As I bent toward the floor to pull the wide-gauge needle from my kit, I licked the lidocaine cream from my fingers, quietly shivering with ecstasy as the beautiful cocktail of sodium, nitrogen, barium, and boron soaked through the palatoglossus into my lingual nerves, my trigeminal nerve, my hypoglossal nerve, and the glossopharyngeal, from the lingual to the vagus, tickling my throat, warm and cooling all at once. I stood. The sleepy grin I gave the team was drunken, cheeky, slutty. I licked my tingling lips, told the frightened-looking nurses to steady the patient, and directed the gracefully curved tip of the two-horn needle expertly into the patient's lower thoracic nerve. Patient Priyanka gasped and squeezed the sides of her cot. Quickly, I pushed towards her corda inquina and set up the rigging. I'd practiced on Maya. We'd made love with tubes sticking out of her back, crunching as we writhed, wriggled, and shuddered. I just managed to push in the loss of resistance syringe and feed the milk of the poppy inside her dura mater before I let go of the rigging and dribbled some instructions to the nurses to plug the patient's release button in so patient Priyanka could squirt heaven inside herself. Walked crisply out into the corridor, leaving the yabbering clamor behind me as I rounded the nearest corner, tugged on 3, then 4, finally 5 cupboard doors, before I found one as inviting as a hotel. Walls 2 meters apart, with a paint-splattered aluminum basin to sit on so I could tear off my sock, jam a needle between my big and little toe, tickle the medical calicensal nerve with a little drink of bliss, and plunged the needle's depressor down so hard I blasted all the way up to my sciatic nerve. I rolled hard into a pile of buckets. Final year. Maya fell asleep on a flight of stairs and tumbled down and cracked her femur. They gave her a blood test, and the nurses looked at the results and ran and got Dr. Jody. When she woke, she was a druggie. Nobody trapped in a plaster cast in traction. Dr. Jody was scribbling on his prescription pad, but was angling it protectively away from her. He even shunted his chair back a foot from her bed. He wrote her a script for morphine, and she glared at the pathetic quantity he was signing off. "Don't you have anything stronger?" Dr. Jody told me later that she would have lunged at him like a vampire if she hadn't the cast on her leg. I agreed. It was a shame what had happened to her. If I could get my hands on the bastard that got her hooked. I was losing my family. I tried to hang out with the boys, but everyone was dispersing to Britain, Canada, or the South Island. They were off being paramedics or rural doctors or lecturers. Some of them even had admitted being a doctor was too stressful. They quit. And now the worst drug they did was cholesterol. At home, Maya shot up and watched TV all day. She saw this thing on Discovery. A tiger was sedated with 100 mils of fentanyl. She took up the challenge. She dosed as much as a tiger, then as much as a dolphin, then as much as an Indian elephant. "Smash it," she said one day, just as I was about to go to work. "Crack it open." She pointed her scratching knife at me. "Immediately." There was nothing around the house to crack through the plaster cast on Maya's leg, so I went out and bought a spade with a good sharp edge. I did a few practice whacks on the arm of the couch and the coffee table. "I don't think I should do this," I told her. "Then how the fuck am I supposed to get to my femoral vein, genius?" I need a hit first." She nodded and made a hurry-up, swirling motion with her index finger. I injected myself and shot her up through the crappy sapphirous vein on her foot to appease her while I got ready for the big injection. Then I was ready to take off her cast. The first few whacks with the spade cracked the plaster. The last whack cut into her muscle. Maya cried, peed into her dressing gown, and bled on the couch. She didn't want a bandage, though. Maya begged for another squirt. I dialed for an ambulance, and they rushed her in while she cried, "Carafin, cuff," sliding between alive and dead. Her re-broken femur weaked, cracked, and sharp, that punctuated her femoral artery, and her leg was blue and fat, blood leaking inside her like a garden hose. Dr. Jody babbled in Hindi. His eyes glinted, wet and shiny as he wailed, wept, and chased the stretcher down the corridor. The only word I caught was BT. "Fentanyl won't do it, Dadu," I told him on the edge of the operating theater. "It has to be the strong stuff." He looked at me with hurt. Dr. Jody was our top physician, but he'd let his children cling to his legs. We were dragging him down. "With apology to the god," he sighed, withdrew his pad and signed the authorization. I raced to the dispensary, got the carfentanil, and on the way back paused with the vial in my hand, licking my lips, just staring at the prize I was holding. 24 carbons, 30 hydrogens, and a couple of nitrogen and oxygen atoms are positioned on the compound just so. Symmetrical and beautiful. I was standing outside a giant white clean toilet. I could lock myself away and go on holiday right now. Escape all this. No. Resist, man. Patience. They said there were less than 10 minutes to get Maya's leg opened. Fresh blood put into her, and the severed lower section of the artery rerouted. 8 people were in the room, half of them just healthcare assistants mopping up as Dr. Jody clamped the upper half of the pulsating artery. Maya gasped and tried to sit up. People without time to gown upheld her down while she kicked their nice shirts. "Anesthetic! 10 milligrams only! Bastard! Fuck! I'm on it! I plugged her in, pushed the trolley to the corner, tubes everywhere, and stood there with my nose against the heart monitor, watching my eyes plane in the air, shuddering against turbulence. I depressed 10 milligrams of carfentanil into her tubes, and her vitals dropped, lurched, and dropped again. Her face went from purple to white as she lost a full liter of blood, then 1.5 liters. Nobody paid attention to me. Everything was shouting in his shoulders. I bent over her and kissed her lips goodbye. I squeezed the depressor and pushed into her every last drop of the fountain of ecstasy she'd been waiting for. 20 mils, 30, finally 50. Clear and pure. Carfentanil slid into her bloodstream as her plane dropped silently out of the sky, and her vitals plunged to nil, while I sucked the loaded breath from her lips, and the nurse began bellowing at me. "What did you do? What did you do?" So, broken docs. That's my story. I'm not allowed back on the ward. Yet. And I have to help you. All of you. I must prove to Dr. Chan that I can watch over my broken doctors while you're awake. And if you trust me, I'll be there while you sleep.